Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, I was 16 years old at the time when a curveball was thrown indiscriminately at my family that none of us ever saw coming. It would ultimately change our lives in ways we never imagined possible, and not in a good way, I'm afraid to say. But luckily, with the course of time, the storm did quickly pass by, even though this was a bad one. But against the odds, things returned to normal, as the storm only lasted for a very short while, thanks to my mother's incredible ability to bounce back from a tumultuous situation, rather like the perennial daffodils in spring that come back year after year, even when the weather has delayed its promises. I was known to my friends as Howie, although my real name was actually Howard, although few people chose to call me by my full name, while my sister Victoria, who was 14 years old, 2 years my junior, never ever had her name shortened by her peers to Vicky. I don't believe for a minute that the name Vicky would have ever suited my sister. Even her friends seemed to appreciate that. My sister was definitely a Victoria in every sense of the word. She was courageous, bold, but also, despite being a perennial tomboy, she possessed an understated elegance that made my mother wonder whether in her later life she would shed the tomboy veneer. She would one day blossom into a girly girl, and I hasten to say by the time she reached her late teens, that's exactly what happened to my sister. And if I tried to remind her what a tomboy she used to be, I hasten to say her memory has become rather select in that regard. I do recall every afternoon, me and my sister Victoria would be routinely sitting at our desks in our bedrooms upstairs, dutifully doing our homework, under the insistent, rather devoted supervision of my mother, who liked her children to have an ordered structure to their lives, which was something she'd never had herself growing up. So she wanted it all the more for us. I guess you always want for your children what you never ever had for yourself. My mother's own life growing up had been so scattered. Her parents had moved away regularly from state to state and town to town when she was a little girl. Let's just say my mother had been to more schools than some people have had hot dinners. It meant she'd never felt settled in her life. No sooner had she made friends at her new school in a new state, and now she was adjusting to a whole new life, and then her parents would announce they were moving away again, and when she asked them why they were moving, her father's answer would invariably always be the same. "Your mother's not happy here, Ashley, so we need to move away, I'm afraid." He would whisper to my mother, "Your mum's got itchy feet again. Have to keep her happy, don't I, love? Or we'll never hear the end of it." My mother was soon to learn it was not the places that her parents moved to that were the problem, or the people living in the various states they went to live in. It was her restless mother, who was like a migratory bird, with an urgent burning itch or a desire to fly away at a moment's notice. If you didn't know any better, you might believe that my grandmother was descended from gypsy lineage, as travelling around the place came a quintessential way of life for my mother. Suffice to say, because of all this moving around, my mother felt like a fish out of water. I think this was one of the quintessential reasons my mother was so fiercely attracted to my father Simon when she met him all those years ago. I suspect she knew, deep in her heart, he would give her the stout stability that she ravenously craved in her own life. My mother first met my father Simon while walking the family dog, a black Scottish terrier called Conway, who the vet insisted was getting far too fat and would need at least 3 walks a day. This was part of the prescription for Conway, including a rather fearsome, calorie-restricted diet. My grandmother Chloe, my mother's mother, was of course not remotely amused by any of this. She believed that Dr. Erickson's strict exercise protocol was way too excessive for the small dog. She reminded the vet that poor old Conway had short legs. But the vet said the legs weren't the problem, but the lack of exercise most certainly was. "Next time I see Conway, Mrs. Curtis, I expect to see he's lost a significant amount of weight. Your dog is obese. His weight is a problem. It can cause health problems later along down the line." My grandmother Chloe begrudgingly put my mother Ashley in charge of dog walking duties. As my grandmother was lazy, she didn't like to walk anywhere. She tirelessly complained that her hip was hurting, but my mother never believed that this was true. It was just an excuse. My mother enjoyed walking Conway, but the dog was beginning to find 3 walks a day was way too excessive for his short little legs to endure. My mother was 23 years old at the time, my father 22. My father had been driving down the road, feeling hopelessly lost. He couldn't find the road he was looking for. Everything was so badly signposted in that neighbourhood. All of a sudden my dad spotted a pretty young lady walking a very overweight black Scottish terrier down the road, which he found a rather endearing sight. The dog looked as if he was completely fed up with all the walking, and had just about had enough. He couldn't help but think my mother looked like she was familiar with the area. My father was in 2 minds as to whether to stop this young lady, to ask her for directions, but he was so desperate to find the place he was looking for. He'd been driving around and around in circles for what seemed like an endless age. He stopped his car opposite my mother and called out to her, "Excuse me, ma'am. So sorry to trouble you like this, but I'm looking for Glenford Terrace. You don't happen to know where I might find the place? I promised a good friend of mine I'd drop a parcel off for him to a Mr. and Mrs. Richards, but this is the first time I've been in the area. Everything around here is so badly marked. So to be frank, I can't see the wood for the trees. I've been driving around in absolute circles and getting nowhere terribly fast. I wouldn't ask you for directions, but there's no one else around, and you look like you might know the area rather well." My mother smiled at my father warmly. "You're lost, all right," she said, letting out a cheery laugh. "I haven't lived here that long, you know. My family moves around a lot, thanks to my mother. It's hard to explain where Glenford Terrace is. The place is ambiguously obscure, I'm afraid. A little off the beaten track, you could say. It's clandestinely buried behind a plethora of trees. You can't see the house from the road. I don't know how to give you good directions to explain how to get there. I can put money on it that you'll never ever find it." "That bad?" said my father, raising a brow. "Just my luck, it would seem." My mother looked at my father sympathetically. Suddenly her face brightened, as if she had a grand idea. "I tell you what, how about I show you the way there? I'm afraid you're a long way off from your destination. Everybody tirelessly complains about how badly signposted everything is around here. But nobody does a damn thing about it. It makes me mad. I can see you're not a local from around here, and I'm afraid when newcomers come to the area, they get very confused and hopelessly lost. Some visitors actually go to the sheriff's office to ask for directions. It's really that bad." "Well, they're not wrong about that," my father agreed. "Someone needs to get their act together, don't they? And mark some of these roads. Whereabouts is the sheriff's office? I could go there myself and get directions from him. Maybe you can direct me there." "Don't be silly. There's no need to do that. I'll show you where Glenford Terrace is. It really is no skin off my nose." My mother beckoned for my father to open the passenger side door for her, which he did, if rather reluctantly. To my father's astonishment, my mother had climbed into the passenger side seat beside him, with her overweight dog seated on her lap, who looked extremely grateful to have the weight lifted off his feet. "This is Conway," she said, introducing the dog to my father. "Unfortunately, Conway's not very happy at the moment, are you, boy?" Conway let out a disgruntled woof, as if he heartily agreed with my mother on this. "He looks pretty miserable, doesn't he? And he's so exhausted after having 3 walks a day, every day, as prescribed by our vet."
"That's pretty rough for a small dog like himself."
"That's what I think, and my mother thinks that too. My mother had to put him on a strict diet. And, of course, the 3 walks a day are really getting him down." Conway seemed to snort, almost as if the dog agreed that his life was not exactly a bowl of cherries at the moment. My father chuckled in amusement. He lifted up Conway's paw and said,
"Very pleased to meet you, Conway. I'm very sorry about your strict diet and severe exercise regime. But once you've lost a little weight, you'll feel much better about yourself, I'm most sure."
"He doesn't look terribly convinced about that, does he?" laughed my mother. "You're funny. I don't think anybody's ever shaken Conway's paw before. And I don't think he'd agree about feeling better. Conway loves his food far too much. And his idea of feeling good is getting lots of titbits sneakily gifted to him from under the table. It's my dad that's entirely responsible for his weight gain, although of course he'll never admit it. Conway only has to look at my father from under the table, through his dark, smouldering eyes, when my dad is eating his meal, and my dad literally folds like a camping chair. The next thing you know, half the food on my father's plate is in Conway's tummy. My mother gives him a hard time about it, but he never ever listens."
"Your father sounds like a soft touch,"
said my dad, smiling warmly at my mother.
"I very much like the sound of him, and if I was a dog, I'd love him."
"You sure would," my mother agreed. "Now let me show you the way to Glenford Terrace." My mother leaned forward in the passenger side seat. She pointed to the road. "You need to take a right at the end of this road over here. I'll show you where to go from here. There are quite a lot of twists and turns around here. That's why I could never draw you a map, because you'd end up in Timbuktu," she said, laughing gaily, "and then you'd be more confused than ever. And we can't have that, can we?"
"You're telling me," interjected my father, "it's an absolute maze around here. It's like they do say no good deed goes unpunished, don't they? I was passing through the area, and a friend chose to take advantage of me, asking a favour of me, and it's cost me a lot of wasted time. I've been held up by my complete inability to find Glenford Place. I was about to give up and return parcel to sender, if you know what I mean. I just about had enough, so I guess my friend will owe you a special thank you for helping me deliver the parcel to the Richards. He's a bit of a cheapskate, I'm afraid. Always looking for a bargain, he is. I said to him, why don't you use the postal service, like anybody else? But my friend is very eager to save a penny when he can. He's not exactly poor."
"Oh, I know people like that. The last school I went to, the girl's parents actually drove a Rolls-Royce, would you believe? And yet they bought her clothes from thrift stores to save pennies. I could never understand it. They were practically made of money. Yet I arrived at school myself wearing better clothes than she ever did. She confided in me that her parents were loaded, but were so incredibly thrifty with their money. They counted the pennies all the time, when their bank accounts were literally busting at the seams, they were so full. Anyway, don't worry, I'll help you get to Glenford Terrace. That's why I'm here." My father told us at the time. He was shocked by my mother's innocent naivety, hopping into his car like a breath of fresh air, with a big, friendly, warm smile on her face, as if popping into strangers' cars was something she did as a matter of routine, almost as if it was water off a duck's back to her. In that moment his first thought was that my mother was like a rare orchid that needed protecting, and this rare orchid appeared to be tugging at his heartstrings for unfathomable reasons that he could not explain. My dad had never felt that way before about a woman that he had so fleetingly met, who had fortuitously landed on the scene of his life, rather like a lucky bird dropping on a windscreen window. He always believed love at first sight was the frivolous notion of a romantic novelist, blessed with a far-fetched, vivid imagination that had nothing to do with reality whatsoever. But his serendipitous encounter with my mother on this unassuming morning had changed his opinion on this matter forever. Ostensibly, after my father met my mother, he fell for her so hard that he didn't waste any time getting a ring on her finger.
He said to me once, "Son, when the right woman crosses your path, you will know about it at once. It was absolutely serendipitous meeting your mother in the way I did, but I was befuddled that she got into the car like she did, so willingly. That was a foolish thing for her to do. I hope you don't make a habit of climbing into strangers' cars so nonchalantly," my father had said to my mother, under a raised eyebrow. "I could be anyone, couldn't I? There's some wacko people out there, some creepy weirdos that might take advantage of a beautiful woman such as yourself, under the guise of asking for directions. My sister Rachel is being forever told by my father never to accept lifts from strange men. If Rachel was taking a lift with a stranger like you are now with me, let's just say my father would be having kittens. And lots of them, I might add."
That's hilarious. It's a good job your father's not around to see me now. What are you saying? That you are the axeman or something? My mother said this with a mischievous, naughty twinkle in her eyes. She laughed so brightly that my father's car lit up, as it erupted with the musical birdsong of my mother's gay laughter. My father told me in that quintessential moment he absolutely knew my mother was the girl for him. He warmed to her at once, as if some of the frost in his heart that had previously been so cynical about long-lasting, enduring relationships had all but melted away. He was now entertaining thoughts of spending his entire lifetime with my mother, and he'd only just met her.
"I'm not joking, ma'am. I'm being deadly serious. You hear stories, don't you, in the papers about people hitchhiking lifts from strangers? And then what happens? They're never seen again. I would very much hate something like that to happen to such a nice lady such as yourself. You need to be careful, that's all I'm saying. I would hate to see a woman like yourself getting caught up into trouble just because she was being a good Samaritan."
"Most people are relatively good, you know," my mother said confidently. "I have faith in humanity, I really do. It's only a small amount of people on this planet that are less than savoury. I like to think I can usually pick them out in a line out. It's called being intuitive. Besides, you're not a stranger to me, are you? Well, not really. I might never have met you before, but you're delivering a parcel to the Richards. The Richards are good friends of my father's. He works for Mr. Richards, you see. So a friend of the Richards is a friend of mine. So by association, we're not exactly strangers, are we? Besides, why shouldn't I trust you? By the way, I haven't even introduced myself yet. My name is Ashley Curtis, and you are?"
"I'm Simon Roxburgh."
"Wow, that's a posh name. Do you come from an illustriously wealthy family or something? Your surname sounds like that of an English earl, or something aristocratic from Britain. It's the kind of name you'd expect to read about in an 18th century novel. Lord Roxburgh has a nice ring to it. Please tell me you're a lord. I couldn't bear it if you weren't."
"Sorry, I'm not a lord, nor am I an earl. I'm definitely not a person that comes from money. My family is very run-of-the-mill, middle class, I'm afraid. I'm very sorry to be so dreadfully boring."
"Oh, how frightfully dull," my mother said, pulling a disappointed face. "I was hoping you were going to tell me you're related to some earl or something, and you live in a grandiose mansion where servants wait on you 24/7, and you have your own butler who polishes your shoes so they shine like the noonday sun. Never mind. You can't have everything, can you? Well, I'm very pleased to meet you, Simon Roxburgh. But before you lecture me any further about the dangerous repercussions of hitching lifts with strangers such as yourself, let me direct you to the Richards' house. We're very nearly there. Believe me, without my navigational skills, which are pretty excellent, even if I say so myself, you ain't got a hope in hell in finding the place. Looking for Glenford Terrace is quite literally like looking for a needle in a haystack. It turned out my mother was absolutely right about this. My father reckons he'd have not found Glenford Terrace without my mother's help. But in those days they didn't have GPS facilities. So if you had a lousy sense of direction, you were probably absolutely stuffed. As my dad would say,
"We don't all have an internal compass like migratory birds. But I guess we can dream."
To cut their love story short, let's just say I'm sure you can predict very accurately what happened next, as if tuning into your favourite rom-com. But I always believe real life is so much more interesting than what is portrayed in the movies. My mother and Dad got talking as you do. after my father had dropped her back to her family home, with Conway, who hopped out of the car by her side. He was so glad to have been spared of any of the excess exercise he would have had to have undertaken on his short legs. He gave my father an appreciative look as he got out of the car. My father took down my mother's telephone number, and the phone calls invariably started. I guess they never stopped, as romance budded, blossomed, and bloomed, like the first flowers in early May, bursting joyously through the soil, in a show of bedazzling bright colours that never ever fade. My parents instantly connected, rather like two magnets being pulled together with such a powerful force that you can't tear them apart. My father told my mother when he dropped her back home that day that he would very much like to see her again if she was agreeable to this. She teasingly said, "I'll think about it, shall I?" For a moment my father's face had looked crestfallen, as he thought he might never see my mother again, and that idea did not sit well with him. My mother poked him in the chest playfully, with her coquettish, whimsical charm, and said, "Well, where do you want to go for our first date, then?" My father looked delighted. He took down my mother's number and said he'd call her. He probably called her later that day, if I know him. My father said when he was dating my mother, he couldn't wipe the big cheesy grin off his face. When his mother saw him when he returned home, after he first met my mother, the first thing she said to him was, "Who is she, son? I can see you're in love. I'd know that look anywhere. I had that look on my own face after I met your father, so I'm reasonably well acquainted with it, you know." "Nothing gets past you, does it, Mum?" My father had chuckled. "If you must know, I admit it. Yes, I've met a girl." "I knew it! I absolutely knew it!" my grandmother cooed, in delight. She was longing for my father to meet a pretty lass, and now it seemed that he had. "Of course nothing gets past me, love, but then you should know that, shouldn't you, by now? So go on, Simon, who is she? I'm bursting to know. You know me. I'm the perennial romantic. I don't want you to spare me any details. I need to know everything. You know me in a love story. Well, I just can't resist, can I?" "Her name is Ashley Curtis. She's the most delicate creature I've ever laid eyes on. I think I'm in love, Mum. But how's that remotely possible, when I've only just met this extraordinary woman? And to think I saw her walking down the road with an overweight dog called Conway. If I hadn't been delivering a parcel for Neil, I'd never have met her." "Well, I think your chance encounter with this lovely lass was preordained, don't you? I don't believe things happen by random chance or accident. Now that you've found her, love, you're not going to let her go, are you? If I were you, I'd get a ring on her finger as soon as you possibly can. And don't waste your time about it. Nothing worse than procrastination or dawdling. That can bring the death of many relationships. Don't you forget that, son, for a single second, or you'll have me to deal with, and a great deal of regret on top of it all. But might I not scare her away, Mum, if I'm over-eager and I come on too strong?" "Nothing wrong with being over-eager, son. Playing hard to get is so passé as far as I'm concerned. I can't stand people playing frivolously silly games in relationships. All this cat and mouse stuff, it's so overrated. We're grown up, for goodness sake. It's so much more preferable to be honest in a relationship, to wear your heart on your sleeve. A woman needs to know where she stands with you, what your intentions towards her are. She doesn't want you to believe you're stringing her along, or that your intentions towards her are dishonourable. When your father first met me, he said to me, 'I think I'm falling in love with you.' We'd only just met, you know. But he never kissed me for several weeks after that. We did take things slowly." "And that didn't scare you? His eagerness, I mean." "Absolutely not. Why should it scare me? I was impressed that your father wasn't playing any games with me. And you'd be wise to do the same, son. Besides, if you want something badly enough, you go for it, don't you? You don't waste your time with this one, if you feel so strongly about this young lass. You've struck gold, love. That's not going to happen again, believe me, I know.
So don't you dare look a gift horse in the mouth. That's all I'm saying, love, or you will live with a great deal of regret." My father listened to his mother. He wasted no time in taking his mother's salient advice, while courting my mother, as within 3 weeks they'd got married, and it was my grandmother on my mother's side of the family who was not terribly happy about her daughter's impulsive eagerness to tie the knot, in what she considered was a terrible hurry to get married. "But you barely know Simon Roxburgh, love," she complained to my mother. "Ashley, you can't possibly know someone in only 3 weeks. The idea is ludicrous. Why are you in such a desperate rush to get married? You're a young woman. You've got all the time in the world. You're acting as if you've got a runaway train to catch." "Mum, you're a fine one to talk, aren't you? You've been rushing around all your life, moving from state to state and town to town. Everything's always been a rush with you. And now you're talking about me being in a rush. I wonder where I get it from." "Are you saying your eagerness to get married to Simon Roxburgh, after knowing him for only 3 weeks, is all my fault? I've never heard anything so ridiculous in my entire life. How can this possibly be my fault?" "Relax, Mum. Calm down. I never said it was your fault, not really. I was pulling your leg. But don't worry about me, Mum. That's what I'm trying to say. I do know what I'm doing. I really love Simon. He's the one for me. I knew it from the moment we met, and it seems he felt the same way too. There was an immediate connection between us. When it's meant to be, it's meant to be, as if our destinies are written in the stars and perfectly aligned. I knew he was the one for me when he shook Conway's paw, and empathized with Conway about how pitiful it was to be on a diet. He made me laugh, Mum. Nobody's done that before. All my other boyfriends were seriously stiff and pretty humdrum, humourless too, taking themselves far too seriously. But Simon Roxburgh is so funny, and I really like that about him." "You are saying he shook Conway's paw, did he?" my mother asked, looking both impressed and rather bemused. "Well, I guess that means he's got a jolly good sense of humour, and I do approve of that in a man. It's an extremely important quality in a relationship. Laughter is like medicine, is it not? What do you think about this, sweetheart?" she said, turning to my grandfather. "About our daughter's rush to get married?" My grandfather said, "If Ashley wants to rush into marriage, leave her be. Ashley's right, sweetheart. You've always insisted we rush from one place to another like a lightning flash. I've done your bidding over the years because we're a team, and I wanted to make you happy. But this is Ashley's life we're talking about now, not yours, not mine. You can't tell our daughter what to do, love. If she's chosen to get married to this Simon Roxburgh, after knowing him for only 3 weeks, she has my blessing. And if he shook Conway's paw, I think I like him already, because believe me, in marriage you need a jolly good sense of humour. I have to put up with you, don't I, love?" I guess if the truth be told, my mother saw in my father a dependable, trustworthy, loyal man that was as reliable as a Californian redwood tree. She knew when he laid down roots they would be equally as strong and enduring. Who doesn't want that in their marriage? With my father there would be none of this jumping around from state to state or woman to woman like a frog that's never happy with the pond it's in and always believes there's a bigger and better pond somewhere else. My mother unequivocally knew when she married my father Simon that for the first time in her life she could happily settle down in one place without feeling the rug cruelly being pulled up from under her feet, which is what her mother had relentlessly done to her over and over again in her young life, and it had made her feel somewhat unhinged. "Do you mind me asking you, Mum, why did Granny Chloe make you move around so much when you were growing up?" I asked her once. "I just don't understand the urgency to keep moving all the time. It seems crazy to me." My mother had sighed in exasperation. "Well, it was your grandmother, Chloe. I know it's hard to believe now, but when she was younger she was what I would describe as a restless spirit. Your grandmother Chloe quite literally had ants in her pants all the time. No sooner had we settled down happily in one state, and my dad found a very good job, my mother would start whinging and complaining about something or everything. She'd come up with all kinds of nonsensical excuses as to why we as a family should move away. She'd say things like the next-door neighbour was giving her a hard time about a tree growing over the yard wall that needed cutting down, or a teacher at my school was not being very kind about me, or the weather was too hot or cold, stuff like that. Ironically, when I turned 23 years old, when I met your father down that street, our family had stopped moving around all the time. My mother, of course, she was getting itchy feet again, but my father refused to move away again. He'd said he'd had enough, and it wasn't going to happen anymore. He was tired of being out on the road, moving from state to state and place to place. I was very proud of your grandfather, standing up to my mother and finally putting his foot down. It was the best thing he ever did. They're now so happily settled. My mother Ashley chose to become a stay-at-home mother, and she intended to raise us to the very best of her ability. She did a fine job in that regard, and Grandma Chloe and Grandpa Russ were always around, which was a miracle in itself. My mother always believed how your children turned out had a whole lot to do with how you parented your own kids. She was determined to be the best mother she possibly could, so that she would be there for us at sports events and gala evenings at our local school, and she always was. Much like my sister Victoria, every afternoon I would studiously work in my bedroom doing my homework, at my desk on the second story of our house, that overlooked idyllic, prepossessing views of the Georgian countryside, along with my father's grove of peach trees that grew on the right-hand side of the valley. Let's just say in the state of Georgia, our peaches are among the tastiest and juiciest in the world. My father successfully managed his orchards the organic way to avoid unhealthy pesticides and contaminants in the peaches that can easily attach themselves to the outside skin and are not healthy to ingest unless thoroughly washed. Sometimes, with the excess of peaches from the orchards, my mother would can the peaches or sell the remainder at the farmer's market. My mother emphatically believed placing my desk opposite the window would rather be like inviting the outside in. She thought it would make me more productive with my homework. She believed the views would inspire me and invigorate my creative energy. I'm not exactly sure her idea worked. I'd often stare out the window longingly, rather like a dog drooling over a bone. I'd fantasize about being outdoors, on the back of my mountain bike, or exploring the woods with my sister Victoria. She was always up for a good time back in the day. It would seem the soft, magnetizing lure of Mother Nature herself would often beckon and entice me, as if she was teasing me to go out of doors and enjoy a little escapism. And when my mother's back was turned, that's exactly what I would do. Spend a little time out of doors and avoid doing my homework. But if my mother caught me, I knew she wouldn't be best pleased with me. My mother was a gentle soul, but despite her gentleness, she was strong-willed and resolutely determined. She was very particular about me and my sister Victoria, acquiring a good education, so she expected us to dedicate a plethora of our time to studies. It would seem she was concerned that I wasn't doing terribly well in math. She fiercely believed English and math were the most important subjects at school. My sister Victoria was academically very gifted, acquiring top grades in absolutely everything, so her successes invariably made my grades look pretty shoddy. I would tirelessly struggle to focus on my math homework, with about as much interest as a horse would have in a platter of pork sausages. God, I hated math with such a passion. It had to be the worst subject at school, the absolute worst. I guess I found it terribly boring, insufferably so. I'd feel my eyes beginning to collapse in class as they closed, and I would drift off into one of my daydreams and be inwardly begging for the school bell to go, to signify the end of that monotonously tedious lesson. When I returned home, I would always procrastinate on doing my homework, much like a flagging dieter who swears they'll go to the gym tomorrow, but tomorrow invariably never comes for them. In my case, I was much the same, but I was left with no choice but to buckle down to my math homework, as come hell or high water, any pitiful excuses on my part, to our teacher, Miss Mackenzie,
weren't going to get me terribly far. How do I describe Miss Mackenzie to you? Where to start? She was probably the worst teacher in living history, as far as I was concerned. She was strict, draconian, and formidable in every sense of the word, and no one had a nice thing to say about that woman, with very good reason, I have to say. Even at 16 years old, I don't mind admitting to you, I was completely intimidated and rather scared of her. Everyone in school called her the Wasp because of her sting. The name seemed to suit her. She lived in a dour-looking grey-bricked building. Completely charmless it was, rather reminding me of a public toilet facility. So I guess it complimented her rather well. I'd cycled past that really dreary-looking nondescript place on several occasions on the back of my mountain bike. The house she lived in looked run down, almost as if it was falling apart, and in her open carport there was so much ancient farming machinery that I guess had once belonged to her great-grandfather that was now gathering dust and descending into rampant decay. I always wondered why she didn't fix the place up, as every year it looked more and more tumble down. The unsightly house was situated not far from where we lived, nestled on the edge of a heavily pitted dirt road, which wasn't pleasant to drive down. Mrs. Mackenzie lived with her twin brother, called Elk. The man was long and lean, but he had muscles on him that could even impress Arnold Schwarzenegger. But his beefy brawn, I'm afraid, did not match up with his brain, so all the thinking he did was pretty much hijacked by Miss Mackenzie herself, who completely dominated the poor man, rather like a puppet on a string, which was ridiculous to see, as Miss Mackenzie was a slight little thing, and her brother was a huge fellow by contrast. It was almost comical seeing them walking down the street together in town, as her brother towered over her, rather like the Leaning Tower of Pisa. I had seen Elk around town often enough. He bore a startling physical resemblance to Miss Mackenzie, but his size made their similarities a lot less conspicuous. He wore his long dark hair in a ponytail that gave him the look of an artist. His arms were covered in tattoos, something I seriously doubted Miss Mackenzie would approve of. Everyone knew he was pretty simple, and there were speculating rumours that he'd been born with water on the brain, which I believe may be true. Suffice to say, Miss Mackenzie controlled her brother, as she did everything else in her life, including the pupils and the classes she taught. In truth, I always thought that Elk looked like a beaten, downtrodden dog, tethered to Miss Mackenzie's side, even though he could have quite literally eaten her up for breakfast if he'd wanted to. It was like watching a Chihuahua bullying a Great Dane, and the Great Dane having no idea how much more powerful he is to the small snappy dog that is terrorizing him and giving him so much grief. Miss Mackenzie kept herself to herself. She lived a pretty isolated existence with her brother Elk. I don't think she had any friends to speak of, but even if she did, driving down that precariously rocky road, infiltrated with potholes, was a laborious nightmare for anyone. Nobody ever appeared to visit the sequestered place, apart from the postman, a man called Clive Pickle, who claimed Miss Mackenzie lived in an absolute dump. It was Elk I felt dreadfully sorry for. It was obvious to any casual observer that Miss Mackenzie bullied him incessantly. The last time I failed to do my homework to Miss Mackenzie's exacting standards, well, on that occasion she pretty much flew off the handle. She glared at me indignantly through her calculating cold eyes that were as dark as coal. "Howard, what is this? What do you call this?" Miss Mackenzie never shortened my name to Howie, which everybody called me. Instead, she always called me Howard, but she addressed the other pupils in our class by their surnames, so I was surprised she called me Howard instead of Roxburgh. "It's my math homework, Miss Mackenzie," I told her, unable to hide the visible stammer in my voice. My heart was literally galloping in my chest. The woman terrified the bejesus out of me, and the look she gave me was so vindictively spiteful. It was like she hated me for being so useless at math, as if my lack of academic prowess meant I was a simpleton that had a P for a brain. If looks could kill, she was wearing that look on her grim face. "Is this a joke, Howard?"
Because I'm not laughing. Do I look like I'm laughing, Howard? Do you think I find this remotely funny when someone presents me with homework like this? This is a catastrophe. That's what it is. An absolute catastrophe. What do you say, Howard?
I don't know, Miss Mackenzie. It's my homework.
What do you think this is?
She said, pointing to the page where I'd done my math homework in a series of illegible squiggles. I will admit that.
What do you call this? Explain it to me, Howard. You think I've got the time to try and decipher what you've written on this page? Because I certainly don't have the time. I would have better luck trying to read hieroglyphics in a pyramid than read what is in this, well, what is on this page.
It's my homework, ma'am.
You've said that twice already, Howard. You call this your homework, do you? What planet are you living on? The planet of the apes? This is a complete mess, Howard. You hear me? A complete mess. The standard of your work is atrocious. It's an absolute joke. You hear that? A joke. No laughing matter. You should be decidedly ashamed of yourself, Howard. This is not your math homework. Do you know what it looks like? A mass of unsightly squiggles that you've deliberately drawn all over the page as if you've been doodling. It looks like something a 2-year-old child would attempt to do. How old are you, Howard? Would you like to remind the class of how old you actually are? Will you speak up so everybody can hear you?
She said, putting her hand on her ear. I'm 16, ma'am.
Well, you need to act your age, don't you, Howard? It looks to me as if this illegible mess was done deliberately, so I couldn't possibly mark your work. Very convenient, I call it. I can't see a thing on this page, not a thing. What do you have to say for yourself, Howard? This is an absolute disgrace. An absolute disgrace.
Some of the students in the class began to laugh, and Miss Mackenzie glared at them warningly.
Enough,
she said, slapping her hand furiously.
No one laughs in my class. Is that understood? This is not a laughing matter, and it's not remotely funny. And the next person that I see smirking, well, they're going to stand in the corner. Is that understood?
Yes, Miss Mackenzie, chorused the class.
Oh, goodness gracious me, I despair with the whole lot of you. You never, Howard, and I repeat, never again, present your math homework to me in this deplorable state. Is that understood? Next time you have the impertinence to present work to me like this, I will be getting in touch with your parents, Howard, to discuss this abomination that you call your homework. It's an absolute disgrace. I've never seen anything like this before in my life.
Yes, ma'am, I said sheepishly, as she flung the exercise book back at me, so it hit me square in the chest, and then went slapping to the floor, so I had to bend down and retrieve it. Miss Mackenzie began to wave a witch-like finger at me warningly.
You need to go home tonight and do this math homework all over again. First thing tomorrow morning, I want to see that book on my desk. Do you understand? And this time, I would actually like to see what you've written on the page, if that's not too much to have to ask. I need to see the numbers clearly. I remind you, Howard, you are not 4 years old.
Yes, ma'am. Miss Mackenzie was always at me, like a mosquito on someone's back, biting them indiscriminately and drawing blood if given the chance. Boy, did that wretched woman know how to draw blood, and it was always mine she seemed to be after, as if she had a vendetta against me, and decided I was the pupil she wanted to pick on and punish all the time. Ostensibly, I had become the so-called bullseye in the dartboard, you could say. Well, that's what I felt like anyway. Some people might have thought I was being overly dramatic or taking things too personally, but I was the one that was always being picked on in front of the entire class. If I descended into a daydream, Miss Mackenzie would pounce on me like a dog on a cat. She seemed to take great delight in aiming the darts directly at me these days. I couldn't fail to notice that I never ever came away from her classes unscathed. I really hated the woman with a passion. I was the kind of young teenager that tended to get on with everyone. I was well liked and reasonably popular in school. Miss Mackenzie had never been married, and for good reason it would seem, as who in their right mind would ever want a woman like her? It was a miracle that I didn't break into hives after one of her classes, from an allergic reaction to the woman, so to speak. There was nothing remotely pretty about Miss Mackenzie. I wish there was, but she had no redeeming features. Her long, pinched, sullen face, with a very pointed chin, did her no favours, and it didn't help that her beak-shaped nose looked far too big for her face. I noticed that her skinny lips were so thin you hardly noticed they were even there. They were like a dash across the face. Everything about Miss Mackenzie was austere and hard-looking. All her blouses were buttoned up so tightly, as if she was androgynous. Her skirts were tailored and very dour-looking, usually in a muted selection of greys or browns. She wore skin-coloured hose that was far too dark for her skin tone, that gave her a matronly look. Every day without fail, her dark black hair was braided into a long, stiff, sensible, no-nonsense braid that came down to the lower part of her back. I was often tempted to tug it like a church bell when she walked past my desk. She accompanied the rather unglamorous, very unfashionable look by wearing the ugliest pair of brogues you've ever seen in your entire life, that looked more suitable for a nun in a convent than for teaching a class of 35 pupils. For some reason Miss Mackenzie took a macabre pleasure in singling me out for humiliation in front of my peers, which she did with a great sense of satisfaction, and I was sick to death of the hateful rhetoric she directed towards me. I had seen that satisfied smirk on her face that revealed all too clearly how much she enjoyed making me look foolish in front of the entire class. She knew I wasn't good at math, so she went for me like an angry hornet, going in for the kill. And I knew she did it deliberately. For some reason she just never liked me. I was the kid she picked on at any given opportunity, which I suspect was what she lightly did to her poor brother Elk. Perhaps she saw something of Elk in me, due to the incompetence of my math homework. It had come to my attention that Miss Mackenzie always brought into her classes a bottle of drinking water with her, which she would leave on the desk. She'd take sips of her water during the class, probably to keep her mouth moist. One day I took it upon myself to fill her bottled water with these very large tadpoles that were swimming around in a green pond swill, which I sneakily placed in her water bottle when her back was turned. Everyone in the class was cheering me along, but none of them was stupid enough to pull a prank on the woman for fear of reprisal from her. I guess I wanted my revenge. She had made a mockery of me in my class too many times, and now it was my time to stand up to her. When Miss Mackenzie had finished explaining some math equations, she reached for her bottle of water and chugged it down eagerly. The classroom became deathly quiet, as everyone eagerly waited to watch Miss Mackenzie drinking down the tadpoles, along with the murky pond water. The question was, would she actually notice it? The funny taste of the water on her tongue, and the tadpoles sliding down her throat. She must have been thirsty, as she began to drink down a considerable amount of water, cluelessly unaware that she'd been chugging down fat tadpoles down her throat as well. The classroom became deathly quiet, as every eye was pinned on Miss Mackenzie, as they watched her drink down the tadpoles, along with the murky pond water. The question was, would the woman even notice the strange taste of the water and the tadpoles that slid down her throat? She must have been extremely thirsty, because she began to chug down a considerable amount of water. She was cluelessly unaware that she'd been chugging down some fat tadpoles. The class erupted with laughter. Little did I realize that this clever stunt of mine would have long-lasting repercussions on me that would cost me dearly, in more ways than I could ever envisage, and seriously backfire on me. Miss Mackenzie was not amused when she realized that she had become the spectacle of laughter in our classroom. She abhorred being humiliated. "How do you like your drink, miss?" cried out one of the boys. "It's tadpole crash on ice. Hope you like it, miss. I'm sure it tastes delicious." Everyone roared with laughter, clapping their hands with glee. Nobody could help themselves. I don't think anybody had laughed so much. and many admired me for being bold enough to pull such a devilish stunt on Miss Mackenzie. Miss Mackenzie eventually wiped her face with a wet wipe. She composed herself. The smell of her rancid vomit filled the entire classroom, and even made me want to heave. She waved the water bottle around the class and screamed so furiously that at first her words were almost indecipherable. I'd never seen her so enraged. Her body shook like a jelly, even though she was stick-thin. Her skin had turned a nauseous shade of violet.
Who did this to me? Who put this pond swill into my water bottle? Who did this?
She demanded furiously, her dark, calculating eyes scanning each and every one of us in the class.
I cannot believe this,
she said, shaking her head furiously. Her long braids swished from side to side, rather like a horse's tail. Everyone went so stoically quiet, you could have almost heard a pin drop, and no one was smiling any more. We could feel trouble was brewing on the wind.
Look at this,
said Miss Mackenzie, waving her bottle around.
I have drunk contaminated water containing tadpoles. Whose idea was this? I want answers now. I'm not going to tolerate this kind of insubordinate juvenile behaviour in class. It's unacceptable.
Everyone continued to be silent. No one wanted to dob me in to the teacher. You wouldn't do that to your friends. So no one said a thing, but stared vacantly into space, and no one dared look at Miss Mackenzie directly in the eyes.
Lovely. This is just lovely. Is everybody going to stay quiet? Is nobody going to tell me who did this to me? If no one takes responsibility for this, then I'm afraid I'm going to put you all under strict detention, the whole damn lot of you, for 2 weeks straight. There will be no going home after school until much later in the afternoon. Your parents will be notified about your bad behaviour in class, and the disgusting way you have disrespected your teacher.
When I realised my schoolmates would have to suffer the consequences of what I'd done, I honourably decided to own up to the prank. I didn't want to put the class through a 2-week detention. That wouldn't be a kind thing to do. I put up my hand.
Miss Mackenzie, it was me. I'm sorry. It was just a joke. I did it. I put the tadpoles and pond water into your drinking bottle. Just a joke. Just a joke, Howard. That pond water, I hope you realise, has got bacteria in it. Did you stop to think of that for a single moment? No, you're far too stupid for that, aren't you, Howard? Always been stupid, you have. I could end up getting Lyme's disease, or diphtheria, or dysentery. This water could be contaminated, and make me seriously ill. I also drank bloody tadpoles. You're a disgrace, young man, an absolute disgrace. You need to go to the headmaster's office at once and explain to Mr. Barker what you've done. Is that understood? I will not tolerate insubordinate behaviour like this. Do you understand?
Yes, ma'am. Miss Mackenzie waved her hand furiously at me, as if she was swatting away a swarm of flies.
Go to the headmaster's office at once, Howard. Hopefully Mr. Barker will give you a fitting punishment for the atrocity you inflicted on me. Shame on you, Howard. Shame on you.
I was terrified of seeing the headmaster, Mr. Barker. I couldn't believe it had come to this. Let's just say he was a no-nonsense man. He didn't suffer fools gladly. I knew I could be in a heap of trouble with him. He was renowned for being very strict and took a tough stance on bad behaviour. On one occasion, a pupil in my class had been caught smoking behind a bush. He had been expected to clean out the school toilets for 3 months straight, which had been a very nasty job. So it was with bated breath and trembling knees I went into his office with my tail between my legs, preparing myself to meet this man's wrath. I had probably gone too far with this joke of mine. I was sure Mr. Barker was going to inflict a worse punishment on me than the boy caught smoking. What could be worse than cleaning out the mucky toilets at our school? Mr. Barker ushered me into the office to take a seat opposite him. The office was cheerless. I felt like someone who'd been arrested for murder, who was about to be interrogated by the police. I wore guilt on my face, as conspicuously as a woman's bright red lipstick.
So what is this about, young man? You are saying that Miss Mackenzie has sent you to my offices. Tell me what it is that you have done.
Miss Mackenzie sent me to you, sir, to explain what I did in class. She hopes you'll give me an appropriate punishment. I just want to say, sir, for the record, I'm really sorry. I didn't mean anything by it. It was only a bit of harmless fun. It really was. Nothing more to it than that." Mr. Barker was tapping his smart fountain pen on the table. He looked at me through his square spectacles, and it was the first time that I noticed how kind his eyes were.
"What exactly did you do, young man, to offend Miss Mackenzie? You know the rules in my school. They need to be obeyed and adhered to at all times. It's very important to respect the teachers. Bad behaviour in the classroom will not be tolerated. You do understand that, don't you?"
"Yes, sir. I didn't mean to do it," I said in earnest, my face reddening into the colour of a London bus.
"Well, you might as well get it off your chest. What did you do, Howard? I think you need to spit it out, or we'll be here all day. And I'm sure you can see I'm a very busy man, with a lot on my plate."
I put tadpoles in dirty pond water in Miss Mackenzie's water bottle. She drank it in front of the class, sir. Everybody laughed and clapped. She wasn't happy about it. She vomited out the tadpoles in the wastepaper basket. I'm very sorry, sir." What happened next really startled me. Mr. Barker erupted into laughter, which he seemed unable to hold back.
"She drank tadpoles in dirty pond water? Oh, goodness gracious, that is funny. I'd have liked to have been a fly on the wall to see that happen. She must have erupted with anger. I'd love to have seen her face."
Mr. Barker called in his secretary to tell her what I'd done, and I kid you not, for 5 solid minutes they were unable to both stop laughing. Their laughter was contagious, so I joined in. I think if Miss Mackenzie had seen us having a laugh at her expense, she would have been mortified.
"I'm very sorry, young man. It's probably not appropriate to laugh at your teacher like this. But I'm afraid when I was your age, I'd have probably been sorely tempted to pull a similar stunt on Miss Mackenzie myself. That's if I had the gall to do it, and I doubt I would have had the gall. I know Miss Mackenzie is as stiff as a starched napkin, so I'm not going to punish you, young man, but don't tell her I told you that. I will inform Miss Mackenzie that you got to write an essay on why you shouldn't give tadpoles to your teachers to drink."
At that, Mr. Barker and his secretary began cracking up with laughter again. Rose Gibley, the secretary, was so amused. She actually had stitches and began to clutch her tummy. She was laughing so much.
"You've made my day, Howard," she said to me. "I don't think I've ever laughed this much in my entire life."
I thanked the headmaster, realizing I'd enjoyed a lucky escape, and left his offices with a big smile on my face. But that smile was not going to last, I'm afraid. Later on in the afternoon, after I'd returned home and was doing my homework upstairs at my desk, a very familiar old beige Mazda rolled up our driveway. I was able to see this from the view from my bedroom window, and it left me in no uncertain doubt who this impromptu visitor was. My heart began to lurch violently in my chest. I could taste trouble on my tongue. It was my teacher, Miss Mackenzie. I couldn't believe she had the brass nerve to brazenly show up at our house like this. My father had never met this teacher of mine, and my mother was out at the time with a few of her girlfriends playing tennis. I knew Miss Mackenzie was going to tell my dad all about my stupid stunt in class that morning. That would not go down well with him at all. Our headmaster might have been amused by my prank, but my father would never share in the joke. He would have a grim view of me making fun of a teacher. I tiptoed to the landing and crept cautiously downstairs to hide behind the door. I wanted to hear everything that Miss Mackenzie had to say about me, so I could prepare myself for being grounded for an entire month by my father. I had never even contemplated that my prank would stretch this far, like an elastic band, that would warrant a visit from the most formidable, humorless teacher in our entire school, who everybody loved to hate. Oh, I couldn't believe she was actually here in our house.
"Hallo," said my father. "Sorry, you must be a friend of my wife's. I've never met you, but I'm afraid my wife is not in. She's out playing tennis with some friends. Shall I tell her you called?" "Oh, do excuse me. You don't know me, Mr. Roxburgh, but I'm Victoria and Howard's teacher. My name is Miss Mackenzie. I teach your children math at school. Might I come in for a moment? I do have a rather delicate matter with you that needs to be discussed, about your son Howard." "Oh, you mean Howie," chuckled my father. "My wife would very much approve of you calling him Howard. She hates his name being shortened. I hope he isn't in any trouble, is he?" "I'm afraid the news is not terribly good, Mr. Roxburgh." "That sounds rather ominous," came my father's baritone voice. "Please come in, Miss Mackenzie." I heard my father leading Miss Mackenzie into the house, where she walked through our hallway, past the mirror on the wall, over our thick designer carpet, and finally past the old grandfather clock, until she stepped into the living room. "You have a very cosy place here, Mr. Roxburgh. I very much approve," came Miss Mackenzie's syrupy voice. And then I heard her let out a flirtatious laugh that left me in no uncertain doubt that Miss Mackenzie obviously liked my father. It was poignantly clear to me. I inquisitively peered through the crack in the door. I could see Miss Mackenzie. Her face was flushing a bright shade of scarlet, and her cold dark eyes looked almost at my father adoringly. "You've got to be kidding me," I thought. Could this get any worse? I never knew that this aloof teacher of mine was capable of warming to anyone, let alone my father. But I knew the look she was giving him was very suggestive, as if she fancied the pants off him. So typically, my father was blindly oblivious to Miss Mackenzie's coquettish behaviour. He'd always been a good-looking man, but the kind of person that was obliviously unaware of his own attractiveness. Women would often flirt with my father, but my father never so much as batted an eyelid. He was immune to the attentions of other women, no matter how attractive they might be. Miss Mackenzie was as unappealing and unattractive as a duck-billed platypus. So honestly, her futile attempts to flirt with my father would not get her terribly far, especially since my father was madly in love with my mother. I'd never seen this giggly schoolgirl side to Miss Mackenzie before, so it took me rather aback. "So could you tell me, Miss Mackenzie, what is this about?" came my father's gravelly voice. "My son isn't in any trouble, is he?" "Well," said Miss Mackenzie, beginning to fan her face with her hands. Oh dear, it's dreadfully hot. Hasn't the weather been frightful of late, Mr. Roxburgh? It's insufferable. It's the only way to describe it." "You're not wrong about that, Miss Mackenzie," my father said. "For the life of me, I don't know how my wife can play tennis in this searing heat. Personally, I can't even sleep at night, as our air conditioner has packed up. Apparently they're going to fix it for me next week. So I'm sorry if our house feels like a sauna." "Oh, don't mind me, Mr. Roxburgh. I'm just bad with the heat, that's all. I think I've met your wife many times before. She's the one that comes to parents' evening very regularly. Her name's Ashley, isn't that right? But I've never had the pleasure to meet you, Mr. Roxburgh. This is a first." "Well, you've got a good memory, Miss Mackenzie. You're right, it's my wife who visits the school. She comes there on parents' evening, and I never come with her. She likes to take charge of the children's education, you see. I'm the one that organises the extracurricular activities." "I see. That is very curious. You don't need to be so formal with me, Mr. Mackenzie. I would much prefer it if you called me Gladys." "Gladys? Well, Gladys it is, then," said my father. "Likewise, you can do the same. You can call me Simon. So, Miss Mackenzie, sorry, Gladys, what was it you came to see me about exactly? You say it concerns my son. You say it's troubling." "I don't know if it's come to your attention, Simon," she said, lingering on my father's name, as if she was lovingly stroking a cat with the silkiest smooth coat. "Your son is not in trouble, but I'm here to tell you that your son Howard is not doing terribly well in math. He's way behind the rest of the class, and it's of great concern to me, as you can imagine." He doesn't appear to be taking his schoolwork very seriously, which is a big problem as far as I'm concerned. I don't like to see any of my pupils in class struggling, when a problem like this can be easily overcome and addressed, in my professional opinion."
Even I was stunned to learn about this. This was not the reason Miss Mackenzie had called today. Wasn't she here to tell my dad about the dreadful stunt that I'd pulled in class? I admit I wasn't great at math, but I wasn't that bad that I was lagging behind every single person in class. Miss Mackenzie was lying outrageously, making out that my math was more abysmal than it really was. Yes, I was lazy. Yes, I could pull my socks up. But yes, well, I wasn't that bad, surely.
"I had no idea," said my father. "Thank you very much, Gladys, for bringing this issue to my attention. I am very grateful for that."
"Well, I thought you should know what was going on in class, Simon. It doesn't do to be behind in math, does it?"
"I was worried about this," said my father. "My wife informed me that Howie was struggling with math, but I had no idea it was this bad. She believes math and English are two of the most important subjects at school that set you up for life."
"Well, she's right about that. So you can imagine I'm very concerned about your son. How can I put it? He does need extra help, and lots of it, or he'll never catch up with the other students, and might be forced to repeat a year if the worst comes to the worst. And I would hate that to happen to him. Your kid has so much potential. He just needs to learn to tap into it."
"Well, Gladys, I really appreciate you telling me this. What do you propose we do?"
"Well, that's where I come into the equation," said Miss Mackenzie. "I'm quite happy to pop around to your house regularly, in the evenings at about 6 o'clock, to give your son private lessons, to get him up to scratch so that he can catch up with the other classmates. I really don't want him to be left behind, Simon. That would be a dreadful pity, especially since your son is a bright young man underneath it all. I think his quintessential problem is that math just bores him rigid. He can't be bothered to focus on it. But if he learned to apply himself a little better, he could accomplish all his goals. I think he can be very complacent and lazy at times. That's part of the problem."
"Why am I not surprised by that? I do know how he gets bored easily. He procrastinates, refuses to apply himself. He's always been that way inclined."
"That's exactly what I mean."
"Look, Miss Mackenzie. Sorry, Gladys. It's very generous of you to offer to help my son Howie out. But why should you be put to this trouble on his account? I'm sure me and the wife can easily organize some extra tuition for him. You have a long, hard day at school every day. I certainly don't envy the mountain of work you teachers have to get through. You can't possibly be expected to go out of your way on my son's account, to tutor him. It's very kind of you to offer, though, very kind indeed, and I appreciate it very much. I will discuss this matter with my wife when she returns from tennis. We will both decide together what needs to be done about this matter. I'm incredibly grateful, Miss Mackenzie, for putting me well into the picture."
"Oh, it's only a pleasure, Simon," purred Miss Mackenzie. "Look, I'm telling you, it's no trouble to give your son extra lessons. He so obviously needs them. It's what I do. I dedicate my life to teaching. I'm incredibly fond of your son, Simon. I, for one, would love to see him thrive and flourish at school, so he can accomplish much in his future. He has so much potential. The trouble is that laziness is his biggest vice, and a failure to focus seems to have set him back a great deal. It seems a dreadful pity he's lagging behind all the other pupils in his class. What can I say, Simon? With a few nips here and a few tucks there, I'm quite sure I can whip your son into shape. And I would be delighted to help you in that regard, in any way I can. As far as I'm concerned, it would be an absolute pleasure to help Howard. Besides, nobody knows the school curriculum better than I do myself."
What the hell, I thought, as I eavesdropped on my father's conversation with my math teacher, Miss Mackenzie. The woman was confessing to like me,
Are you kidding me? She abhorred me. But she was certainly trying to charm the socks off my father. She seemed to be acting like she had my best interests at heart, when she had never given a fig about me before. Please God, I thought, don't let my dad accept her offer. Please, no. I don't want to be stuck with that witch doing math. This is an absolute nightmare. I wish she had come here to yell at my father about the stunt I'd pulled in class today. That would be infinitely better than all of this. To all intensive purposes, the thought of having extra math lessons with Miss Mackenzie after school was brutal to say the very least, and I certainly wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy.
Well, Gladys, now that you put it like that, how can I possibly refuse your generous offer? In the light of what you say, and how well you know the school curriculum, I would very much like you to tutor my son, but we must insist on paying you for your trouble. Otherwise, I'm going to have to refuse your offer. Well, if you insist, that would be very nice, but it's not the money I'm concerned about, Simon. It's your son's future that I'm concerned about. I want that young man to make the very best of his life. I care very passionately about all my pupils. If they do well in school, it always reflects favourably on me as a teacher.
I was so relieved when Miss Mackenzie finally left our house. I thought that woman would never leave. I hurriedly retreated back to my bedroom, with the stealth and cunning of a fox. I pretended to be focusing on my math homework, which was an absolute farce, as I was vacuously staring at an empty page in my exercise book and chewing the back of my pen. When I heard the knock at the door, I knew, of course, that it was my father, and I knew what he was going to tell me. "Come in," I said. My father stood in the doorway, looking a tad uncomfortable.
Howie, just so you know, we've had a visitor at the house. You probably heard the doorbell ringing, didn't you?
Yeah, I did.
Well, it was your math teacher, Miss Mackenzie. She popped around to see me. I understand that you've been really struggling with math and are lagging behind the rest of the class. Miss Mackenzie is terribly concerned about your poor progress. I get the impression your math grades are pitiful, Howie, and that's not good. This can't go on. It just can't. Miss Mackenzie seems like a very nice lady. I've never met her before, as it's your mother who goes and sees the teachers on parents' evening. But Miss Mackenzie wanted you to know that she's very concerned about you, Howie. She says you have an inclination to being very lazy. She thinks you're a lot cleverer than you pretend to be, and the only reason your math is so bad is you simply don't want to apply yourself, because you find math boring. I think she's right about that.
Miss Mackenzie is lying to you, Dad. All right, I admit it. Math is my least favourite subject in school, and I absolutely hate it. But I'm not the bottom of the class. I'm doing reasonably okay.
Howie, I'm sorry, but okay is not good enough. Me and your mother want the very best for you. We want you to achieve things in life. It all starts with getting great grades at school. You're doing well in all your other subjects. You don't need your failure to succeed in math to drag you down. I wholeheartedly agree with Miss Mackenzie on this. It's not that you're incapable of doing math. Far from it, in fact. It's just you hate it so much that you refuse to focus. That's a lousy attitude to have, son. It really is. We all have to do things in life we don't enjoy. There are people out there going to a job every day they absolutely abhor. But they know they need to put food on the table, so they do the job anyway. Nobody ever said life was like a free ride. Numeracy is very important, son. Everybody knows that. The good news is, Howie, is that your kind teacher, Miss Mackenzie, has agreed to tutor you 3 nights a week here at the house at 6 o'clock in the evening. I have accepted her gracious offer and have decided you can do your work with her in the downstairs study.
Dad, I don't need extra help with my math. I'm doing fine, I promise you. If you don't make me take extra lessons with Miss Mackenzie, I really will apply myself this time. I promise you I will. My father raised a cynical brow.
I'm sorry, Howie. You're not doing fine. That's obvious. Otherwise your teacher wouldn't have paid us an extra special visit. You clearly need extra help. and you're going to get it whether you like it or not. My decision is made up."
"But I hate Miss Mackenzie, Dad. She's horrible. You have no idea what she's really like. She's an evil witch. Nobody at school likes her at all. She's super weird, as is her strange brother Elk. Everybody laughs at her behind her back, and she's got no friends."
"I don't want to hear any more of this from you, son. How dare you speak unkindly of a very generous woman who is going out of her way to help you, out of the sheer goodness of her heart. She's making sacrifices on your account. You should be ashamed of yourself. She takes full responsibility as a teacher. She's very, very serious about you needing to do well. She wants you to succeed in life. Where on earth is your gratitude, son?"
Miss Mackenzie. Miss Mackenzie sat in her beige Mazda car. She stared up at the prepossessing, very distinguished-looking white Georgian farmhouse, with its rather lovely red front door and sash windows that twinkled back at her in the late afternoon sun. Simon Roxburgh, who was bidding her goodbye, was still standing in the arched doorway of his home. He waved to her. She lifted up her hand in response to wave back at him, and then very reluctantly she started up the engine to drive back home. She briefly held one hand to her chest for a moment, feeling the pulsating throbbing of her delicate heartbeat, which was rapidly racing a dime to a dozen. Goodness gracious me, it was hot in the car. But she wasn't thinking about the heat concerning the searing temperatures of late, which had been pretty unforgivable. She was thinking more about the heat in her body that her impromptu meeting with Mr. Roxburgh had generated within her. It was a spark that could not be put out. Miss Mackenzie was completely bowled over by the beguiling charms of Mr. Roxburgh. Who would have ever thought that the most obnoxious student in the entire school, Howard Roxburgh, would actually have a heartthrob for a father? She had come to see the Roxburghs today, to tell them all about their son's deplorable behaviour in class, and how he needed to learn some good manners. She hoped her unexpected off-the-cuff visit with the Roxburghs would mean that their objectionable son would be dealt with and hopefully severely punished for the stunt he'd pulled on her earlier on that day, which had made her the laughing-stock in the class. She had very pleasing visions of Mr. Roxburgh pulling off his belt from around his middle. She imagined it to be a belt with a large metal buckle, so it would hurt a lot more when Mr. Roxburgh used it on his son. She had imagined Mr. Roxburgh thrashing Howard's back so very hard, so that by the time he came to school the next day, that weasel would barely be able to walk, and hopefully the wheals caused from his father's thrashing would sting for weeks on end. She wanted Howard to be punished severely for humiliating her so much in front of that entire class. "No one does that to me and gets away with it," had been her vicious mantra that she had entertained as she drove her Mazda furiously to the Roxburghs' house, with only vengefulness and spite on her mind. Things had not panned out quite as she had expected them to. Far from it, in fact. She had believed that both Ashley and her husband Simon would be at home, but instead she had met Simon Roxburgh for the first time in her life. She had become unduly flustered over her encounter with a devilishly handsome man. The smile of his was so disarming it could melt butter on a winter's day, and she had left Mr. Roxburgh's house with a spring in her step, feeling as infatuated by the man as a teenager over an illustrious film star. Miss Mackenzie had not mentioned to Simon Roxburgh what had really happened in class that morning with the pond water and tadpoles, as somehow she had not felt right about mentioning the matter any more, as Simon Roxburgh might think she was being petty. Instead, she had generously found herself offering Howard extra tuition, and profusely going on and on about his potential to succeed in math if he applied himself, which was highly exaggerated, of course. In truth, Miss Mackenzie doubted very much that Howard could possibly be good at anything. He was the most annoying pupil in the entire school. But the dynamics had significantly shifted, as Howard so happened to have a father that was so good-looking he had almost stolen her breath away. The idea of offering Howard Roxburgh extra tuition had suddenly swung into her mind like a pendulum, when she masterfully thought of an ingenious way she could see more of Simon Roxburgh, And the best way to do it was through his son Howard, by offering him extra math lessons. It was a good thing he was so bad at math. Who would have thought in a million months of Sundays that her most deplorable pupil at the school would lead her straight to her Prince Charming? She'd always known he was out there somewhere, and now she'd found him. Miss Mackenzie wiped away the sweat that had gathered on her brow, as just thinking about Mr. Roxburgh made her incredibly hot. No one had ever had this effect on her before. Even the name Simon melted on her tongue like butter over a bagel. "Oh, dearie me, what am I like?" she thought. She had never felt so flustered in all her life. The attraction she felt towards Simon Roxburgh was insatiable. She had never felt such a delicious feeling before, that made every single cell in her body tingle with electric shocks. This must be what it feels like to fall in love, she thought. Who would have thought that would ever happen to her? "I thought I was immune to love, but I'm obviously not. I'm in love," she told herself firmly. "I'm in love with the most handsome man that I've ever had the privilege to meet. I'm going to make him mine, come hell or high water. Too bad there's an annoying wife in the way. But the likes of Ashley Roxburgh, well, she can be easily dealt with." Miss Mackenzie had always been a spinster, and never considered getting married before. That had never even entertained her mind. As far as she was concerned, men were more trouble than they were worth, but Simon Roxburgh had changed everything. The man was absolutely gorgeous. He had seized her undivided attention, and enabled her heart to do pirouettes in a true balleriниc style. She loved the feeling of being so vital, so alive, so animated. She'd never felt like this before. In Simon Roxburgh's presence, she felt as giddy as a teenager with a crush on a film star. She knew that Simon's face would be permanently entrenched in her mind. She liked it that way, as his was the only face she wanted to see. Oh, goodness gracious me! Those eyes of his were to die for! There were soft brown flecks of green and gold dancing around his iris. I've never seen eyes like that before. And when Simon smiles at me the way he does, his mouth twitches up at the corners in a lopsided grin. It made my heart almost skip a beat. There's definitely something between us, Miss Mackenzie decided to herself. He felt it too. I'm most sure he did. Our meeting today was preordained. She no longer felt aggrieved about the pond water and tadpoles incident in class, as without it she might never have met Howard's father. She'd happily drink more of that dirty pond swill with tadpoles if she could wake up every morning to find Simon Roxburgh lying at her side in his king-size bed. She shivered in delight as she envisaged that hunk of a man with his large shoulders holding her close to his chest. So close, in fact, that she'd hear his heartbeat and gladly inhale his all-male musky scent. She'd brush her hand over his 5 o'clock shadow. I'm going to make him mine, she firmly decided. We're meant to be together, and if he can't see it, I'll make him see it myself. Miss Mackenzie lived with her twin brother Elk. They'd lived together for years and years. She thought he was as dim as a blown-out light bulb, but that couldn't be helped. He had his uses, of course, and she took full advantage of them. She would conveniently get him to do all the donkey work for her. The great thing about having a brother who was a half-wit, well, you could get him to practically do almost anything you wanted, without so much as a buy or leave. The poor simpleton was as malleable as putty in her hands. The only time Elk had ever stood up to her was upon his insistence in getting those awful tattoos done all over his body. She had told him, in no uncertain terms, how dreadfully unsightly they were, but that was the only time he had not cared for her opinion. Miss Mackenzie thought about that annoying roadblock in her path that threatened to come between her and Simon Roxburgh, that woman Ashley Roxburgh, who was married to the man. Yes, she was a problem that needed to be dealt with, but who said the course of true love ever ran smooth? When obstacles stood in your pathway, you needed to remove them. Everybody knew that. Miss Mackenzie tried to remember what Ashley Roxbury looked like. The woman must be rather unremarkable and nondescript, she thought, if she doesn't even come into my mind. she thought with a small measure of satisfaction. Then suddenly she recalled the fresh-faced, rather pretty woman with the dark hair and auburn highlights that had asked her earnestly about Howie's performance in school at a recent parents' evening. Oh, that was Ashley.
Hello, I'm Ashley Roxburgh, and you must be Miss Mackenzie. I am so delighted to meet you. I'm Victoria and Howard's mother.
She shook Miss Mackenzie's hand rather warmly.
I want to talk about my children with you.
The memory was steadily coming back to Miss Mackenzie's mind, like a light suddenly being switched on in the passageway of her head. What was it she had said to Mrs. Roxburgh? It was all coming back to her now.
Well, your daughter Victoria, I'm pleased to say, is a delight to teach, Mrs. Roxburgh. An absolute delight. She pays full attention in class and is my best pupil.
Ashley's Roxburgh's face had lit up like a Christmas tree to hear that. She enjoyed hearing the praises of her daughter.
And Howie, she had asked more tentatively, how is my son getting on with his math? Not well, I'm afraid, Mrs. Roxburgh. I wish I could say differently, but I can't. Your son is failing to concentrate. He's very different to your daughter, I'm afraid. He doesn't concentrate in class at all. I find him daydreaming a lot, looking out of the window. I thought you would say that, said Ashley, hanging her head sadly. The trouble with my son, Howie, well, he gets terribly bored easily. I know he doesn't enjoy numeracy in the least. He finds it so boring. That's not an excuse, Mrs. Roxburgh. If your son paid more attention in class, I'm quite sure his grades would significantly improve. I'll speak to him, Miss Mackenzie. See what I can do to get him out of this mindset of his.
Elk knew he wasn't the brightest brick in the block. His sister Gladys Mackenzie was continuously telling him that. But he knew he wasn't stupid either. Yes, he was unfortunately born with water on the brain. But as far as Elk was concerned, he was as bright as the next man. Different maybe, but just as bright nevertheless. He wouldn't of course tell his sister Gladys that, for she'd have never agreed. Besides, she called him harebrained, stupid, and dim-witted all the time. Gladys was permanently reminding him of how grateful he should be that she was there to look after him and to supervise his every need. He was grateful, of course he was, for her intervention in his life, but Elk knew how to look after himself. Gladys seemed to think Elk was dependent on him, but he considered himself to be pretty much self-sufficient. Sometimes Gladys would frighten him. She could be very snappy when she wanted to be, and condescending to boot. Gladys could so quickly fly off the handle when things didn't come up to her exacting standards. Elk knew that Gladys was clever. She was very good at math, which she taught at the local high school. But Elk did not know much about her job, nor did he want to either. He was sure it was tediously boring, as certainly being cooped up indoors teaching teenagers math was not a good life as far as Elk was concerned. Despite the fact that his sister worked in a social environment, she had never managed to make any friends at the school. But Elk was glad about that. He didn't like people intruding in their lives. Elk was socially withdrawn and found it exceedingly difficult to communicate with people. When he was around and about in town, people often gave him funny looks. Elk knew it was because he wasn't like other people, so he was not comfortable around strangers. Besides, as far as he was concerned, they couldn't exactly be trusted. Well, Gladys had told him as much anyway. Elk spent hours in the countryside, exploring the wood grove, and in his spare time he carved woodland animals out of wood to sell at a local curio shop in town. They were always incredibly popular with the visitors to the estate. Elk also knew the name of every single woodland tree or flowering shrub that grew in the woods, for the natural world was his quintessential playground, and Elk certainly understood the cycles of nature like the back of his own hand. The lion's share of his time was always spent in the great outdoors, where he had learnt so much about nature. Elk knew his sister had returned from school in a very truculent mood that day, muttering under her breath something about tadpoles and dirty pond water, and how she'd like to wring Howard's neck, whoever Howard was, and have him hung, drawn and quartered. One way or another, she would make him pay. Elk assumed Howard must be one of Gladys's students, and whatever that poor student had done in class that day, It had clearly caused his sister great upset. "I won't be humiliated! I just won't!" she kept saying over and over again, as if those were the words to a new song she was learning off by heart. Elk reasoned that tonight would be a night when he'd have to buckle up and face the storm of his sister's belligerent wrath. For when she was pugnaciously disagreeable like this, there was no telling how many times she'd call him a dimwit. Elk was surprised that no sooner had his sister Gladys returned home, in her clapped-out Mazda, which was parked in their run-down carport, that she appeared to be going out again, storming off to her car in quite the huff, muttering furiously under her breath something about tadpoles and the boy called Howard that she'd been going on about before. But Elk could not make out exactly what she was saying. But he guessed whatever it was, it certainly wasn't nice.
"I'm just going out, Elk. I'll be back very shortly," she called after him. "I'm popping around to see a student's parent about their son's deplorable behaviour in class today. They live down the road from here, in that grand Georgian house."
Elk knew the place reasonably well that she was talking about, although he'd never seen it close up, so he nodded. He watched his sister strutting to her car, like an angry female peacock. Whatever this Howard had done, he had really made his sister as mad as hell, and Elk felt rather sorry for the boy called Howard, as he knew what it was like to be on the receiving end of his sister's indignant moods, and he wouldn't wish that on anyone. That day things were very strange as far as Elk was concerned. He was rather bewildered when the Gladys that set off to see the student's parents in a very disagreeable mood was not exactly the same Gladys that returned home quite a while later. The metamorphosis in his sister's demeanour was dramatic to say the least. She literally left looking like an angry pit bull, but she had morphed into a lovable little spaniel. Not that there had ever been anything remotely lovable about his sister Gladys. Gladys had sauntered through the front door, looking almost animated, happy even, as if she'd received some very good news. Maybe she'd won some money on the lottery, Elk could not help but think, and if she had, she'd likely not share it with him. Was his sister humming to herself? Elk had never heard Gladys hum before. She looked so decidedly pleased with herself. Her grey skin had taken on a flushed look, as if it was dappled with a rosy glow. Gladys barely acknowledged him, as she brushed past him brusquely in the entrance hall, like a tree in the grove. She stopped in front of the hall mirror to examine her reflection more closely. Then she asked Elk a very strange question. "Elk, do you think I'm pretty?" Elk didn't want to tell his sister that no, she wasn't remotely pretty. That would be a very rude thing to say. Besides, it would make Gladys decidedly angry. Elk didn't want to upset his cantankerous sister. She could turn nasty if she wanted to, and Elk did not like it when Gladys was mean. On one occasion she had grabbed him so hard by the arm and led him into the bathroom. She had forced him to wash his mouth out with soap and water. She had told him his words had been dirty, so his mouth needed a good cleaning out. He had only told Gladys that her glasses made her look like an owl, and that had provoked his sister to rage. Elk liked owls. He couldn't understand why Gladys was so upset when he told her she looked like an owl wearing those glasses. The soapy water had tasted really horrible on his tongue. Then there was another time, when his sister had poured a bucket of ice-cold water over his head. She'd laughed out loud at him when he begged her to stop, as more and more buckets of that ice-cold water were flung at him mercilessly. He had stood there like a prize lemon, as Gladys had thrown the icy water at him, drenching him so that he was soaked to the skin. Then there had been another time after that, was when his sister Gladys had locked him up in the closet for 2 whole days. He was a big man. It had been insufferably dark, claustrophobic and poky in that closet, so much so that he could barely breathe. His long legs got terrible cramps, as he'd taken up all the space in that small closet. Elk had been so scared, as Gladys had spitefully not given him any food or water for those 2 days, and he desperately needed to go to the toilet, and had been so desperate he'd wet himself. And when Gladys had discovered his humiliation, she had told him he was absolutely disgusting. Elk seemed to fail to realize he could easily overpower his sister, given his large size and his bulging biceps. Most people would fight back if £100 woman locked them up in a closet, and they were 3 times her size. But Elk did everything his sister expected him to do, as it had always been that way, and he didn't know any different.
I asked you, Elk, a question, and I would appreciate an answer if you don't mind. Am I pretty?
I think maybe you are, said Elk rather dimly, taking good care to avoid Gladys's burning gaze. Since when had his sister ever asked him his opinion over anything? Gladys never cared about his feelings. She always thought he was so stupid, but it would seem right now she needed her vanity stroking, and Elk didn't have the first clue how to do that for her.
I'm thinking of having auburn highlights put in my hair, Elk. Ashley Roxburgh has auburn highlights, you know.
She said this more to herself than to Elk.
Who is Ashley Roxburgh?
He asked, feeling sure he'd heard the name mentioned before. You didn't easily forget a surname like that. Did the Roxburghs not live in that fancy Georgian house down the road that his sister went and visited moments before?
Never you mind, Elk. More to the point, do you think auburn highlights would suit my skin tone?
I dunno, said Elk, looking at his sister with his jaw gaping wide open. He'd never seen Gladys suddenly show so much interest in her own physical appearance. What was going on with her? Elk didn't like the way Gladys was behaving. She was 41 years old, for goodness sake. She was acting like she was a 16-year-old teenager who had a crush on a boy. All the questions she was asking Elk were rather bothersome, to say the least. How on earth was he expected to know the answers to give her? It was so much better when a few words were only exchanged between the two of them, which was usually the case. He preferred it that way, as both he and his sister didn't usually communicate much. But all these questions really began to irk him. Elk liked a quiet, unassuming, rather demure life, with a few grunts exchanged here and there between him and his sister. But this long drawn-out conversation he was having with her was not his kind of thing at all. If Elk had hoped his sister Gladys's behaviour would revert back to normal, that was wishful thinking on his part. One day he'd got quite the shock when she'd returned home looking decidedly different. For a moment Elk didn't recognise his sister and thought a stranger was visiting their house, and that had upset him greatly, so he'd run into the house to hide from this visitor. He was soon to realise the stranger was no other than his sister Gladys, but he'd barely recognised her. It turned out his sister had been to the hairdresser's in town for a full makeover. Her braid had been cut off. Her hair had been done in sumptuously thick, rather flattering layers, with auburn and hazelnut highlights. The new look his sister sported really did do wonders for her hard features and her angular pointed face. It certainly made her look a lot more feminine. Even her bird-like nose was less conspicuous, and the tones of her hair did appear to make her dark eyes look less hostile. Within days, Elk observed that his sister's wardrobe had undergone a huge overhaul. She was now wearing pretty feminine dresses and skirts, the likes of such she'd never owned before. She even wore lipstick on her lips, in a bright crimson colour. Elk barely noticed his sister's lips before, because they were so desperately thin. But the strangest thing of all is his sister had been buying items from that naughty shop in town, where the mannequins brazenly paraded themselves in skimpy underwear in the window. Every time he and his sister had walked past that shop, called the Foxy Lady, Gladys had always instructed Elk very firmly to keep his eyes shut.
There are some things you don't want to see, Elk, because they will pollute your mind with filth, and goodness knows what else.
Elk thought there must be something bad about the shop, if his sister Gladys didn't want him to look at what the models were wearing. But now she was buying some of the stuff to wear herself, which he thought was decidedly odd. Elk had seen the bags with the logos Foxy Lady on the outside that his sister had brought home, and piled up in the entrance hall. There were so many of them. He had been shocked to see the silken woman's underwear folded between layers of crisp tissue paper. He thought his sister liked big, beige, sensible bloomers. She always wore that kind. They hung on the washing line for years. They were strong, resilient, plain and ugly. If the truth be told, that's what she always wore. Why were things different now? Why was she buying small lacy knickers that were so incredibly fragile they looked like they might fall apart after a couple of rigorous washes in the front loader? His sister of late was becoming decidedly strange, and Elk could not figure her out at all. These days she seemed so preoccupied all the time, as if her mind was thousands and thousands of miles away. Elk knew that 3 days a week his sister would drive down the long dirt road in her Mazda to that sequestered big Georgian house that was owned by the Roxburgh family. When she went to that house, she always seemed to return in an incredibly good mood. She would always leave the house dressed up to the nines in one of the pretty dresses she had purchased, as if she was going out on the town to a special occasion, when in fact she was just tutoring a student called Howard to help him improve his grades. When Gladys returned home, the annoying humming would start up all over again, as if his sister had become a night cricket. You think he'd be pleased that his sister was more upbeat these days, but that was not the case. Elk observed that Gladys, his sister, was ignoring him a lot these days, and that had to be a good thing. He rather liked that. But it was her paradoxical, rather bizarre antics that made him feel increasingly uncomfortable. His sister appeared to have become someone else, someone he barely recognized. Elk would have preferred Gladys to be putting him down, calling him a dimwit, ridiculing him all the time. He was well used to that. Elk liked his daily life to be predictable, not complicated by the element of change. He believed that change muddied the waters, causing confusion, and nothing was more bewildering than watching his sister Gladys behaving so weirdly. Elk would watch Gladys twirling around in front of the mirror for hours on end, modelling a brand new dress that she'd bought in town, and she was forever annoyingly asking him how she looked, and he'd never known what to answer. Elk didn't care what his sister looked like, and neither had she even bothered about her appearance until very recently, when she started visiting the Roxburgh house. He knew his sister was giving extra math lessons to a student living in the grand Georgian house called Howard Roxburgh. She claimed he was incredibly stupid. Well, he must be stupid, Elk thought to himself, to need so much extra help with all his math. These days it seemed like his sister practically lived at the Roxburgh home, or at the very least she appeared to want to live there, judging by the way she kept behaving. One day Gladys returned home from the Roxburgh house in a bad, truculent mood that was very conspicuous. Elk had not seen her like that for a long time. Indeed, he'd seen stormier skies that had looked less menacing than his sister did right now. Gladys began to kick at the doors in the kitchen. A couple of them flew off their hinges. Then a glass pane in the kitchen cracked, when Gladys cursed under her breath and threw a mug in the air, so that the coffee splattered all over the wall, and jagged pieces of broken china lay haphazardly across the floor, that Elk knew he'd have to clean up. Gladys stomped around the house like an angry bison, as she began kicking everything in sight, and by the looks of things she had a vendetta against the sofa, the wing chair in the lounge, the mahogany coffee table, and one of the bookshelves in the hallway. "How can this be happening?" she shrieked. "I don't bloody believe it! I don't! What the hell am I going to do?" When his sister had caught Elk staring at her through frightened wide eyes, she had snorted, "What are you staring at, Elk? Never seen anyone letting off steam, have you? You're a stupid, gormless idiot. Get out of here, will you? I can't bear the sight of you. I need my space. I need to think." Elk didn't dare ask his sister what was going on with her, but he knew he'd find out soon enough, and he sure did. It would seem Howard Roxburgh was doing remarkably well in math. Gladys's extra tuition services had paid off, and were no longer required at the Roxburgh household. According to the Roxburghs, Miss Mackenzie had done an outstanding job in getting their son's Howard's grades up to scratch, and it appeared that he was now getting top marks in class. Miss Mackenzie had obviously done a good job with a stupid student, Elk thought. She should be pleased by her accomplishments, but pleased she most certainly was not. Elk could see his sister was decidedly upset. He worked out pretty quickly for himself it was because she couldn't go to the Roxburgh household any more. It would seem Gladys really liked going over to the Roxburgh house to give her pupil extra tuition, which was why she'd always dress up and leave the house smelling like a sweet bouquet, with red lipstick on her lips, looking happier than he'd ever seen her look before. With Gladys no longer visiting the Georgian house at the other end of the dirt road, Elk had all but noticed that Gladys had become increasingly petulant, moody and capricious. She was snapping at him tirelessly, calling him an imbecile all the time. At long last, the old Gladys he'd always known and found it difficult to love was finally back, which for Elk was reassuring. One day Gladys told Elk that she had a very important job she wished for him to do. Elk rather liked the sound of that, as his sister had never asked him to do anything important before, so this was a first. "We are going to bring Mrs. Roxburgh, Howard's mother, home to live with us, Elk." "But I don't understand. Does she not live in that fancy house down the road?" Elk pointed out innocently. "Why would she want to live here?" "We're bringing her to live here, Elk, but it's a big, big secret. No one must know that she's living with us. Do you understand? You can't tell anybody about this. Not that you would, of course, because you never speak to people. But it's our special secret. You're good at keeping secrets, aren't you, Elk?" "I suppose so," said Elk, his jaw dropping wide open. "But why are you bringing her here?" he asked. "Why all these questions, Elk? I told you why I'm bringing her here. Why are you such a dimwit? Why don't you listen properly to anything I tell you? Yes, she is moving in with us for good. You, Elk, are going to lock her up in the spare bedroom for me. You will bring her here during the day while I'm teaching at school. You will take a quick shortcut through the woods and carry her here, making sure that nobody sees you. She's not a heavy woman, probably 20 pounds heavier than I am. You're a strong man. That's not going to be a problem for the likes of you. You are to leave her in that bedroom en suite, with the door safely locked. Is that understood? There is no way you can let her out." "So that's why you got me to put bars on the outside windows and a security door on." Gladys smiled. "Goodness gracious me, Elk, I am impressed. You're not as stupid as you look, you know. Yes, you put all that security up for me so that that woman cannot escape. I've prepared the room very nicely for her to make herself comfortable. There's snacks in the room, water, toiletries, and there's a bathroom. There's nothing that she could possibly need. But we can't have anything in that room that she can use to hurt us with. We'll ply her with sedatives to keep her calm. Is that understood? And give her lots of books to read to keep her preoccupied and entertained." "But I can't bring her here. I don't even know her. You know I don't talk to strangers. She lives in that big fancy house on the edge of the woods at the bottom of the road. Why would she ever want to live here?" "Because she will want to live here. That's why. And because I say so. Now, do you want to do something important for your sister, or don't you?" "What must I do?" "Have I not already told you, Elk, what I want you to do, or were you not listening, you dimwit? How many times am I supposed to repeat myself? When I'm at school teaching, you're to go to the Roxburgh household and knock on the door, and Mrs. Roxburgh will answer the door. That's what you're supposed to do." "But why would I want to do that?" "Because I say so, Elk, and when I say something and tell you to do it, I expect you to do it." Elk nodded. "Mrs. Roxburgh will be at home. When she answers the door, I want you to grab her. Put this injection into her arm as quickly as you can." "But why must I do that? It's not nice sticking a needle in the arm. It can hurt." "Oh, don't you worry about Mrs. Roxburgh, Elk. I'm sure she's had lots of injections before over the years. She's a big girl, isn't she? She won't mind a needle. The injection will make her woozy, very sleepy. You must carry her through the woods to bring her back to the house to ensure you're not seen. You don't want her kicking and screaming and making a commotion, do you? That's why you need to give her the injection. She'll only draw attention to you if you don't. Luckily, this is a sequestered area, but you still need to be very careful and vigilant. Now I will show you how to inject her. We will practice on some raw chicken, and you'll soon get the hang of it.
It's not that hard, I can assure you. You will bring that sleeping woman back here at once. She'll fall asleep very quickly the moment you've stabbed her with the injection. That's the idea. When you bring her back to the house, I want you to put her on the bed so that she can continue to have her sleep. You will then lock the door behind her. She's got everything she can possibly need for the next few days or so. Water, food, plenty of toiletries. I've even left her some of my old clothes she can wear. She'll be absolutely fine. We're not treating her badly, Elk. We're just keeping her locked away in that room. But I can't do that. I'm scared. I don't speak to people, especially not strangers. And I don't like sticking needles into people's arms. And I don't like the idea of locking her in the room. I don't think it's nice to lock people up. Don't you worry. I can assure you she is going to be fine. Don't be overreactive about this, Elk. Don't you want me to be proud of you? Don't you want to show me that you're not a gormless idiot after all? That maybe you're not as stupid as I've always thought you were? Don't you want to prove me wrong about that?
Elk was far from happy. He couldn't understand why his sister Gladys wanted him to bring Mrs. Roxburgh to live at their house with them. It made no sense to him at all. But there was no point in arguing with Gladys. He knew he could refuse his sister nothing. He had to go along with this strange, nonsensical game of hers. It would seem bringing a strange lady to live at their house in the spare room made things so much more complicated for him. He wished things could go back to normal. But his sister was at it again, behaving strangely. Elk had done exactly as his sister Gladys had demanded of him. It had been a lot easier than he had anticipated. He had felt a tad nervous about knocking on Mrs. Roxburgh's front door. He didn't like meeting strangers at the best of times, but the kind lady had been awfully nice towards him, and had not looked at him in a funny way like some people did. Elk had never seen the Roxburghs' home close up and personal. It was so very different to the grey drab building where he lived with his sister Gladys. Everything about this house was beautiful. Hedges were pruned elegantly, the grass mown to absolute perfection. Colourful summer flowers proudly tumbled out of terracotta pots. Everything was beguilingly pretty. Elk could not help but admire the gleaming, bright red polished front door. The one he and Gladys had at home was badly scratched up and in disrepair. He heard the female voice inside saying, "I'm coming, won't be a second," and then the door abruptly swung open, and that was when Elk first laid eyes on Mrs. Roxburgh. She smelt so nice, of lemons, he thought. She was a pretty woman. She had auburn hues in her dark hair, and Elk liked that very much. Maybe this is why his sister Gladys was so determined to get her own auburn highlights done, but she could never look as fetching or as pretty as Mrs. Roxburgh did. "Hello there," said Mrs. Roxburgh, unable to hide her surprise in seeing Elk standing at the front doorstep. She knew this was Miss Mackenzie's twin brother, who everyone described as a simpleton. What on earth was he doing on her front doorstep, looking rather like a stray dog that was looking for a new home? The big, bulky, strapping man was wearing a red plaid shirt. He had a long ponytail. He looked exceedingly uncomfortable, as if the last place in the world he wanted to be was standing on her front doorstep. Maybe he needed help, she thought. Had Miss Mackenzie had a fall or something? Were the first thoughts that came flying into Mrs. Roxburgh's head. "I know who you are. You're Elk, isn't that right? You're Gladys Mackenzie's twin brother. I thought I recognized you. Goodness gracious me, this is a surprise." Elk nodded. "That's right, ma'am. I am Gladys's twin brother." "You are the one that makes those delightful carved curios in town, all those animals out of wood. You really are talented to make those. I buy them quite regularly, you know, as gifts for friends, for people who live out of state, because they love them so much. I particularly like the key rings you make." "Is everything all right at home?" asked Mrs. Roxburgh, looking concerned. "Miss Mackenzie is all right, is she not?" Elk nodded, and then with an act of courageous boldness he pulled his hand out of his pocket and lunged forward. stabbing the injection into Mrs. Roxburgh's arm. Elk felt really bad, as it must have hurt to stab Mrs. Roxburgh like this. She cried out for a second, gave him a funny look, then her eyelids started to close. She almost lost her balance, but Elk caught her in time. She was like a flagging flower in the meadow after a scorching hot day that had just about had enough. Elk stopped her fall gently and then lifted the woman in his arms. She was light. She probably did weigh 120 pounds, as his sister had said she would. She was easy enough to carry. Elk had certainly carried dead deer that were heavier than she was. Elk scooted down the woodland trail with an easy grace for a man who was so solidly built, and he made a quick shortcut through the woods to get back to his house. It was a beautiful summer's day, the sun dancing merrily through the trees, spilling its light prisms through the branches, and dappling the forest floor in an ethereal glittery glaze, which made everything glow to a certain extent. Some of the green plants were covered with silvery droplets of water that had been left behind from the recent rainfall. Bees and butterflies seemed to happily frolic over the woodland flowers. Birds tweeted high up in the canopy of the trees, while a couple of white-tailed deer skittered away nervously when they saw Elk. Elk wasn't happy to be bringing this pretty lady to live at their house, locked up in the ensuite bedroom, rather like a caged animal. He knew it wasn't right, but what could he do? It was more than his life was worth to go against his sister's demanding biddings. Sometimes he wished he could live on his own, without Gladys interfering in his life and laying unnecessary demands on him that made no sense to him at all. Gladys was always telling him how much he needed her, but did he really? Yes, his sister was decidedly clever, so if she said he needed her, then he obviously did. But Elk independently made his own money, and with his carved ornaments that he sold to the curio shop in town, that were in high demand, especially the wooden key rings that he created of woodland animals, with the name of the state of Georgia engraved on them. People loved to buy those as mementos, and recently he'd been carving key rings with peaches on them as well, and those were selling like hotcakes, as peaches were the state's revered fruit. Elk did all the cooking and cleaning in the house for his sister Gladys, who liked everything to always be spick and span. He regularly bought food items at the local store, from lists that Gladys would prepare for him. She would get decidedly angry with Elk if he overlooked an item on his shopping list. Elk drove an old beaten-down truck that had once belonged to his father, but it still worked rather well, even though it made a rather unfortunate clattering sound. Why did he need his sister? He didn't know the answer to the question. As Elk was casually sauntering down the beaten track, with the woman in his arms, he was very glad she wasn't awake. Elk wouldn't know what to say if she was awake, as his social skills were sorely lacking, and how could he explain to her that he was bringing her back to live at their home? He knew the pretty lady would not be happy about this. Elk could hear the sound of heavy feet thumping towards him, as twigs crackled and leaves were crushed, while the ground vibrated under the ponderous footfall that seemed to charge towards him. Elk was familiar with the man coming his way, whom he considered a very good friend. All the animals in the woods respected the hairy man. The birds would stop tweeting, and everything would become respectfully silent when he was around, as if in some way they knew it was only polite to be quiet, like the pupils in the school that became very silent when the headmistress starts to walk on the podium to address her audience. Elk knew his hairy friend was the keeper of the forest. He watched over everything with a shrewd, discerning eye, and was always quick to sense when something was amiss, rather like a snake can easily detect its prey on the wind. The hairy man's name was Umuna, and Elk liked him, as Umuna understood him in the way that regular folk did not. People looked on Elk as one of society's misfits, due to his learning difficulties, as his brain was obviously wired differently to other folk, but Umuna never looked on him as stupid, but on the contrary seemed to acknowledge him and respect him, and no one had ever treated Elk like that before. The hairy man lived in these woods and had done so for many years. Elk knew he walked over vast distances. He never wore clothes, as his whole body was covered in long flowing dark hair, but his body temperature always remained regulated in both summer and winter, He was adapted to living in the wild, and Elk knew if the hairy man wanted to become invisible, he could do so, just like that. Elk marveled that he had this ability to just camouflage himself to his surroundings so that no one would see him, like some fish in the ocean managed to do. Imuna was incredibly strong. He had a powerful, robust body, and even in his presence, a large man like Elk felt conspicuously small by contrast. Elk had never asked Imuna how old he was. That would have been a rude thing to do. But Imuna seemed to read his thoughts, because he'd answered Elk once in his head and said, "I'm old enough. That's all you need to know." And that had been enough for Elk. The hairy man stood in the footpath, looking at Elk. There were 2 dead rabbits dangling in both of his hands. He had promised Elk 2 rabbits that morning. Rabbits were delicious in stew. They tasted exactly like chicken. Elk always made stew for his sister Gladys. She believed it was chicken she was eating, but he never told her she was actually eating rabbit. If he'd done so, she'd probably have had a hernia on the spot. But Imuna had assured him that rabbits were excellent food. Elk enjoyed doing business with Imuna. He'd give the hairy man crunchy peanut butter, granola bars, raisin and oatmeal cookies, and honey, in swift exchange for quality meat or fish that Imuna caught. The hairy man stopped dead in his tracks when he realized that Elk was carrying a woman in his arms. His treacle-coloured eyes grew round in surprise, as if he thought his eyes were deceiving him. Imuna was obviously wondering what Elk was doing carrying a woman in his arms like this. Ostensibly, to any casual observer, it probably wasn't a very good look. Far from it, in fact. Anyone might believe there was something dreadfully wrong with the pretty woman. Her eyes were closed shut, but with the gentle rise and fall of her chest, it was easy to observe that she was still breathing. Imuna looked concerned and rather troubled as he trotted over to Elk with his normal confident swagger. He cast a disquieted gaze over the woman that Elk was carrying in his arms. Imuna's large hand touched Mrs. Roxburgh's forehead, as if he was touching her to observe her temperature. He grunted something under his breath, and then Elk heard the words in his head. "She's fast asleep. Why are you carrying her in your arms? She doesn't look sick to me, but she's out for the count. Dead to the world, it would seem." "My sister wants me to bring her here to live with us," Elk explained. "My sister made me poke her arm with an injection, so she fell asleep. She wants me to take her to the bedroom and lock her away in there for a long time. She told me to bring her to the house. I'm not happy about any of this, but my sister gets upset if I don't obey her. She gets angry at times. She scares me a lot." Imuna looked baffled and rather bemused. He scratched his head as if he was deep in thought, puzzling over a strange conundrum that he needed to resolve. "But why does she want you to do that?" he asked. "I don't know. My sister made me bring her here. She wants to keep her in a room locked up like a bird, in a cage. My sister is strange, Imuna. I've never understood her." Imuna was not impressed with Elk's revelation. He knew at once that something was decidedly off, and the woman had been taken to Elk's sister's house against her will. "I know who she is," he said. "She lives at the big white house at the bottom of the road. I've seen her many times before, when she takes her dog for a walk in the woods. She never sees me, of course. I make sure of that, because I'm in my invisible mode. But it's not right, you know, bringing her here against her will. You do know that." "I have to do it," Elk informed Imuna. "If I don't do what Gladys wants me to do, she'll be mad. Once she was so cross with me she locked me up in the closet for 2 whole days, without food and water. It was cramped and dark in there. I could barely breathe." Imuna nodded, as if he understood Elk's plight. He did look troubled, though, about the woman that Elk was carrying in his arms, as if in some way he wanted to help her. Imuna put the rabbits on the branch. "For you," he said to Elk. Elk nodded. He watched the hairy man gliding away. After Elk had placed the sleeping woman on the bed in the spare bedroom that his sister had planned for their prisoner to occupy, he then remembered what else his sister had ordered him to do. So he obediently returned to the large house at the bottom of the road, where the Roxburghs lived. The front door was still half open, and Mrs. Roxburgh's car keys were sitting on the desk in the hallway, where his sister Gladys told him he'd likely find them. "If you see a purse on the table, I want you to bring it back as well, Elk, so people will assume that she left her house on her own accord. That's what I want them to think." Elk found the purse next to the keys and drove the car back to his sister's place, as she had instructed him to do. "It's very important, Elk, that you make the car look like a pile of compost." "How am I supposed to do that?" he'd asked Gladys. "You need to cover it with twigs and bark, of course, and all kinds of plant material," she had insisted. And he'd done just that, so that Mrs. Roxburgh's car resembled a huge pile of compost. Ashley Roxburgh. It had been several days, insufferable days at that, where I'd been living in a bedroom en suite in Gladys Mackenzie's house of all things. Why the woman had brought me here I couldn't fathom, but her motives were highly nefarious. If my husband Simon had an inkling of what she'd done to me, he'd be livid. He'd literally wring that woman's neck in a heartbeat. She must be completely deranged, I thought. She was harmless enough when she was tutoring my son, but I could see she was anything but. My poor family must be so worried about my whereabouts, wondering what has become of me. My husband and children will be distressed to see I'm not at home. And yet my car remains in the carport and my purse and keys on the desk in the hallway. So they're not going to make any sense of my disappearance at all. Why would I leave the house without my car and my keys? Surely this will make my family realize that something is up. I can see Miss Mackenzie has got Elk to do all her dirty work for her. She was the reason why he injected me with a sedative, so that I was easily brought back to the house in his arms fast asleep. I figured out that had happened when Elk suddenly stabbed me with a needle, and everything went completely black. I don't remember anything after that. I do recall the needle being stabbed into my arms and suddenly feeling dizzy, but then everything just disappears from my recall. I don't think the poor man wanted to do any of this to me, but Miss Mackenzie pretty much rules the roost around here, with a formidable grip. That has become painfully apparent to me. I've been locked up in this bedroom for several days now. I soon learnt there was no way of escape. There are bars on the windows and the bedroom door, designed to keep me safely locked away. Whenever Gladys enters my bedroom, she always insists that Elk is by her side. Elk always looks incredibly uncomfortable, rather like a deer caught in headlights. She carries a Glock pistol in her hands when she visits me, which she points at me warningly. She says if I do anything stupid, she won't hesitate to blow my brains out. I believe her on this. She's not right in the head. Miss Mackenzie gets her brother Elk to bring me steaming hot food on trays, which he lays down for me. Then she insists that he removes all my dirty dishes. I feel sorry for Elk. He's the only hope I have in getting out of my prison. I need to work on him in some way, to get him on side, and to help him see that what his sister has done is terribly wrong. I can see he does give me apologetic looks, as if he's trying to tell me that none of this is his choosing. I believe that is true. I know he doesn't enjoy my being in their house, any more than I enjoy being a prisoner here, but at least I have food in my belly, toilet facilities available to me, clean clothes and hot water, as well as books to read. So I'm a lot better off than some people who've been abducted. I try to tell myself this all the time, when I begin to feel sorry for myself. I knew it was more than my life was worth to wrestle with the likes of Miss Mackenzie. She is stark raving mad, rather like Kathy Bates in that Stephen King novel called Misery. I remember watching that movie a while back, and believing that no one in real life could be that unhinged. But let me tell you, they can, because Miss Mackenzie is literally the doppelganger for that woman. I'm not exaggerating when I say that. Miss Mackenzie wants me here, and if she has to end up breaking my legs to keep me immobilized, like Kathy Bates did with her victim, she'd surely do it. I wouldn't put anything past that woman. I'm sorry to say this, she's downright evil. My son Howard would tell me as much about her, but I simply refused to listen. I believed he was a belligerent teenager making a fuss about having to do some extra studies. Now I know he was speaking the absolute truth, In the beginning I did not comprehend why Miss Mackenzie brought me here in the first place, but I was soon to find out what her ulterior motives actually were, and they threw me a loop, let me tell you. I don't know why it took me so long to cotton on. Why are you doing this to me, Gladys? Why did you bring me here? Why are you keeping me a prisoner? What have I ever done to you? I asked her.
It's not personal, Mrs. Roxburgh. It just is what it is.
Please let me go, Miss Mackenzie. I won't tell anyone you brought me here. It'll be our little secret. Miss Mackenzie did not dignify my questions with a response. I knew I could have screamed, banged on the walls, kicked up a major fuss. But no one would have heard me anyway. Besides, I needed my wits to devise a cunning plan to escape my current confinement, and falling apart at the seams would never get me very far. It was when Gladys came into the room a day later with her Glock gun pointed at me, when she demanded I write a letter to my husband in my own handwriting. I understood what was going on. The letter read, "Sweetheart, I'm sorry to leave you so abruptly, but I need plenty of time to think. I'm going away for a while. I'm not sure if I will ever return. Please don't try and find me. There really is no point. I'm happier on my own. Take good care of the kids." "Why are you making me write a letter like this?" Gladys I'd asked. "I don't understand. You're not going to kill me, are you? Bury me in your yard? Make me suddenly disappear? For goodness sake, Gladys, be reasonable. Why are you doing these insane things? This is absolutely ridiculous. You've gone too far. Me and my husband, we love each other. He won't believe this letter if he reads it for a single second. I'm sure he will believe it was written under duress. He knows we don't have marital problems. He knows I'm very happy in our current relationship. So writing an absurd letter like this won't make any sense to him at all."
"That's where you're wrong, my dear. He will believe the letter,"
said Miss Mackenzie, looking smugly satisfied, as she took the finished letter away from me. Her cold dark eyes glinted with malice.
"I'll make sure he believes every single word of it. Don't you worry. I have no intention of killing you. What's the point? I'm a reasonable person after all. I'd never stoop as low as to murder anyone. That would be so vulgar. Besides, I don't need to do that. I will keep you here for as long as it is needed, until your husband Simon finally realizes it's me he loves and not you. When you're no longer around, your husband will become incredibly lonely. You know what men are like. He'll need lots of comforting and reassurance. He'll need his bed nicely warmed, won't he? And I'll be there for him, Mrs. Roxburgh, when you aren't. I'm quite sure once I've turned on my charms, he won't be able to resist me. I knew from the moment I met your husband that he was meant to be mine. We are soulmates, destined to be together forever. And you, Mrs. Roxburgh, you're just in the way. That's all."
It was in that poignant moment I did really realize what was going on here. Miss Mackenzie was in love with my husband, and would stop at nothing to get her grubby hands on him. I was obviously in the way of her endeavours, which was why she brought me here. She claimed she had no intention of killing me. Could I believe her on that? I wasn't sure I could trust her. The woman was fanatical. Fanatics are exceedingly dangerous. Everything suddenly made perfect sense to me. It had been all over town that Gladys Mackenzie had a love interest, for she had undergone an extraordinary metamorphosis of late that everybody was talking about. In a small town, people tend to gossip a lot. Little did I realize her love interest was my own husband. My daughter Victoria was very vocal regarding the matter of her math teacher, Miss Mackenzie. "I'm telling you, Mum, that woman is dressing so differently these days. I can hardly believe it. She used to dress like a nun in a convent. Everything she wore was so sensible and dull, and she used to wear these disgusting brogues on her feet. I think the only colours in her wardrobe were grey and brown. I mean really drab stuff. She always wore that big ugly black braid of hers. It was so long it almost touched her bum, and her hair was pulled away from her face, which made her look more hard, you know. It did nothing to soften her sharp features, or that beak-like nose of hers. When she came to school with her hair all pretty with auburn highlights, and she was wearing lipstick. It made her eyes stand out. I was in shock, let me tell you. I barely recognised the woman, Mum. Everyone gasped when she entered our classroom to teach math. She was dolled up to the nines as if she'd stepped out of a bandbox. People began to giggle. The boys were giving her wolf whistles and saying, "Miss Mackenzie, is that you?"
Goodness gracious, you kids can be mean.
I'm glad I'm not a teacher by profession, I said. The giggling and wolf whistling is a bit nasty, is it not? Give the poor woman a break. Good for her, I say. If she's met someone, then I'm very happy for her. She's been terribly sweet coming here to give Howard extra math lessons. Not many teachers would do that. I will admit these days she is dressing nice. But what's wrong with that? Having a sense of self-esteem. Trying to reinvent yourself. I say good on her. What do you think about all this? I asked my son Howard. I hate Miss Mackenzie. She's an absolute cow. She may think she looks pretty these days with her brand new wardrobe and fancy hairstyle, but you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear, can you? It's so embarrassing, her coming all the time to teach me math at our house. She makes out to Dad that I'm so terrible at math, that I'm lagging behind all the other pupils in class. But she's exaggerating, Mum. Look, Howard, I think the reason Miss Mackenzie comes over to give you math lessons is because she knows that you're a perfectly capable pupil and that you're able to do the math, that you're a clever young man. But your big problem is that when you don't want to do something, you don't apply yourself. Well, I will apply myself now, Mum. I really will. If that little hag goes away and leaves me alone and doesn't teach me math, I don't like her being around. And you should see how she is with Dad. It's pathetic. What do you mean, how she is with your father? Nothing, said Howie. Forget I said anything. Howard, when my mother vanished mysteriously from our lives, as you can imagine, my family didn't take it at all well, least of all my father Simon. It was so uncharacteristic of my mother to bugger off like that. It made absolutely no sense at all. But her car and purse were missing from our house, although she did leave the front door wide open and failed to lock up behind her on the day she chose to vanish from our lives. We knew she would never willingly just abandon us like this. My father reported her missing to the police, but they didn't do anything for the first 24 hours, especially as her car and purse were missing, which suggested that she had chosen to leave us on her own accord. A day later my father found a letter in a plain envelope, tucked under the front door mat, explaining my mother's sudden, inexplicit departure from our lives, which once again made no sense to us at all. My father was not sure how long the letter had been lying under the mat for. In the letter my mother enigmatically expressed that she needed her space, and we were not to try and find her. When the police read my mother's letter, they were very nonchalant about everything, as you would expect them to be. They simply told my father that a search would not be necessary. My mother had chosen to go off on her own accord, which she was perfectly entitled to do so as an adult.
I don't understand, my father said. You've got to believe me, officer. My wife just wouldn't saunter off like this, nor leave a note. If we have issues in our relationship, we talk about them. Besides anything else, my wife would never leave the kids without saying goodbye first. Was your wife suffering from depression, Mr. Roxburgh? My father was asked. Absolutely not. Well, not to my knowledge, that is. Were you having marital issues, perhaps? I've just told you, officer, no to all the above. We were both very happy in our marriage, very happy indeed. We really love each other. We are always going on about how lucky we are to have each other. I think I would know if my wife was feeling miserable in my marriage. Look, Mr. Roxburgh, the letter you say is written in your wife's handwriting. You found it yourself under your front door mat, did you not? Yes, it is her handwriting, officer, but the message is so vague. My wife wouldn't write a letter like this. My wife is extremely articulate. She never just bugger off like this, officer. It's most unlike her. I think something nefarious is going on. You have to believe me on this. I know this is not easy to hear, Mr. Roxburgh, but people, I'm afraid, in my experience, are much more complicated than we imagine they are. We might think we know them better than we do. We might think we know what is going on in their heads. But sometimes when people are going through stuff, they keep it to themselves. Your wife has said very clearly in the letter that she needs her space. My advice to you is to give her plenty of time. I'm sure when she's had a little break from home, she will return in due course. Perhaps she just got a little overwhelmed, that's all. It does happen, you know.
My father was a broken man that was seemingly falling apart at the seams, although he desperately tried to hold it together for us. He went everywhere, looking like a lost dog. He looked for my mother and asked the folks in town whether they'd seen her, or if they might have a clue where she might have gone. I think my father soon rather sadly realized that he was looking for the proverbial needle in a haystack. He would never find my mother. Many of the locals were dropping over to our house with casseroles, offering words of encouragement. One of my mother's friends, called Sheila Larkspur, gave my father hope when she told him that once she'd done much the same thing as my mother.
You mustn't worry, Simon. You really mustn't. I've gone off for a few days myself, you know, when my life got on top of me. I did much the same as your wife did. I left a note for my husband saying I needed space. It sounds very familiar to me.
My father's face lit up when he heard that.
Don't look so surprised, Simon. Yes, I did that, and I'm not proud of myself. But things really just became so overwhelming for me. I needed to get away from it all. We were going through so much stress at the time. My husband was not remotely impressed by my leaving, of course. But I felt so down in the dumps, so dreadfully depressed. When that happens, people sometimes run away from their lives to get a sense of perspective. I know I did. When I was away, it helped me to reflect a lot, and I realized how much I missed my husband. So I returned home pretty soon, you know. I'm sure, Simon, that Ashley will be back soon herself. Maybe she's going through a rough patch like I did. She recently turned 40 after all. That could be very upsetting for some women. When I turned 40, I was absolutely devastated. I really thought it was the end of the world. All those big numbers when it comes to birthdays can be most distressing for women, you know. So you think my wife was very upset about turning 40? Well, it's a possibility, isn't it? You mustn't overlook it. Where did you go, Sheila, if you don't mind me asking? My father inquired. Well, I found a sweet little cottage by the coast, didn't I? I rented the place for an entire week. It was the best thing I actually ever did. Time to be on my own. Time to reflect. I came back feeling so re-energized. My husband was not best pleased with me, of course, but that's a whole other story. And let's just say, I would never do that again. I realized how fiercely I'd hurt the man.
I think that Mrs. Larkspur's words had given my father a renewed sense of hope. He told us that he'd been an absolute fool. He'd failed to realize that my mother was going through a tough time.
I know she wasn't desperately happy when she turned 40. She put on a smiley face, of course. But I could see it upset her. She didn't like the big number. She was saying she felt old all of a sudden. Maybe that is what this is all about. Give your mother plenty of time, and I'm sure she will be back.
I don't think Mum was sad when she turned 40, Dad, my sister Victoria interjected. She seemed perfectly all right to me.
Maybe she was hiding it from us well,
my father had said, seemingly determined to believe this narrative. It helped him hang on to hope that my mother would soon be home. It was soon after my mother had gone from our lives that Miss Mackenzie, my math teacher from school, kept popping around with casseroles for my father from one day to the next. My father seemed to be blindly oblivious that Miss Mackenzie clearly had the hots for him. When she arrived at our house in her beaten-down Mazda, she looked as if she was about to go to the opera, she was so dressed up.
"Oh, you poor thing, Simon,"
she said to my father, batting her eyelashes at him and trying to look demure.
"I heard the dreadful news via the grapevine, that your wife has left you. I'm sure Ashley never appreciated what a good man you really are, Simon. You deserve so much better than her. I can't understand what Ashley was thinking, leaving you like that. It's nonsensical. I mean, honestly, what a dreadful thing to do. And abandoning your children like this. The mind boggles. The children need their mother. I'm sorry to say this, Simon. I'm sure you don't want to hear me say it, but Ashley has been incredibly selfish doing this to you. Look, Gladys, I'm sure you mean well. But my wife, she's not been herself recently. I'm sure she will return home in due course, once the dust settles. I think she's been a little down in the dumps recently, depressed about turning 40. But it's very kind of you, Gladys, to make us casseroles. But it's really not necessary. Oh, but it is necessary, Simon. I must insist. Everyone in town is terribly worried about you and your family. Nobody can believe Ashley walked out on you. And the children, of course. It's a dreadful thing to do, a dreadful thing. If you were my husband, Simon, I would never treat you so shoddily. Never. I'm very sorry, Gladys, but I really would prefer if you didn't talk about my wife like this. I'm just sure she's going through the dark night of the soul. It happens to all of us from time to time.
I was later to learn from my father that one day he returned home to find my math teacher, Gladys Mackenzie, lying in his king-size bed, waiting for him while she kept the sheets warm. He never told us about this, but it really rattled him at the time, as you might expect. She had put rose petals on the bed and French champagne on ice in a large tumbler on the side table. My father had no idea how she managed to get into the house, but he sneakily suspected she'd found the spare key that we kept hidden under the terracotta plant pot. At first my father was so startled to see Miss Mackenzie smiling up at him coquettishly and patting the pillow with come-to-bed eyes. He could see she was dressed in very sexy lingerie, as if she was fully intending to seduce him. He was stunned and appalled by this. He stared at her disbelievingly, with eyes on stalks.
Oh, Simon, look at you. I'm so glad to see you. You look so exhausted, so run down. What that woman has put you through, it's too dreadful. Come here, Tiger, she purred. I've been thinking about how desperately lonely you must be. I can make things a whole lot better for you. I thought I'd keep your bed warm for you. Would you like some French champagne? I've got some on ice. I brought it especially for us to enjoy together. What the hell are you doing in my bedroom, Gladys? You need to get out of my house right away. I don't know what you think this is, or what idea is in your head, but I'm not interested in you. I love my wife. Oh, don't be like that, Simon. You're a very good man, you are. You deserve so much better than that wife of yours. I came here today to make you happy. I know how lonely you must be. You don't need to be all defensive with me. I know you've been going through hell, but I will make it better, I promise.
She rose out of her bed in her lacy ensemble and trotted over to my father, and before he knew it, she was trying to unbutton his shirt, as she began to stroke him like a cat.
This is not appropriate, Miss Mackenzie. I don't know what you think all this is. But we will say no more about this. My children will be returning home soon, and the last thing they need is to see you hanging around the house like this. You've got the wrong idea about me. I'm not looking to have a fun time with another woman. That isn't who I am. Now will you please leave? Oh, don't be like that,
Gladys had said. She hadn't been happy to leave at all.
It's probably too soon for you, Simon, for a relationship, but I will wait for you. But just so you know, I very much doubt your wife is ever going to come back. I'm quite sure she's left you for good. If you do get lonely, you need your bed warming at night, all you have to do is give me a call, and I'll be over in a shot. Gladys, I'm sorry, but I'm not interested, said my father. My only concern I have at the moment is to find my wife and to bring her home safely.
One day, as I was seated upstairs in my bedroom at the desk, doing my homework, trying desperately not to think about the whereabouts of my mother or what had become of her, because that just made me feel desperately unsettled. It was late afternoon. For a moment, I was tapping my pen, briefly glancing out of the window, and that was when my attention was drawn to a tall, lofty figure standing outside the woodgrove. I did a double take. No, I thought, that just can't be. But I knew my eyes were not deceiving me. I quickly picked up my binoculars to focus on the spot. I observed a male Bigfoot standing outside the fringe of trees. He was looking up in the direction of my bedroom, as if he could see me. So I instinctively leaned out of the window to have a better look at him through my glasses. Was I even seeing right, I wondered? This just can't be. I assure you that when you see something that is so paradoxical, the first thing you do is challenge yourself and argue with yourself about what you're observing. When I leaned out of the window with my binoculars, the Bigfoot's eyes were pinned on me. He began to wave at me, gesturing for me to follow him. That was when I heard a voice in my head saying, "I need to show you something. It's important." Before I knew what I was doing, I had scrambled down the stairs, dashed outside, and was now finding myself following a Bigfoot down the earthen trails through the trees, on what appeared to be a prepossessing but warm day. The only way I can describe to you what was happening to me is that I was locked under some kind of hypnotic trance that the Bigfoot seemed to have placed on me. How he managed to do that, I do not know, but I couldn't fight against it, try as I might. I wasn't afraid of this incongruous feeling, as my thoughts didn't appear to be my own. It was like I was a puppet on a string, being controlled by someone else, who was governing all my moves and my thoughts. It was as if this Bigfoot had in some way taken full control over me, like a lamb being led to the slaughter, as if my mind had almost been perfectly dusted and polished of any doubts, fears, worries or concerns. It was like a powerful, indomitable force was propelling me ever forwards, so that I was awkwardly stumbling over fallen leaf litter, bracken and broken twigs to keep up with the fast pace of this extremely nimble Bigfoot. I could tell he was old by the discernible streaks of grey in his dark flowing hair. He moved with an enviable grace, as if he was floating. Before I knew it, the Bigfoot had led me straight to Miss Mackenzie's formidable grey-looking house. At first I wondered why he'd brought me here. Let me tell you, close up and personal, the house was extremely ugly and in a bad state of repair. Even though I knew it wasn't right to trespass on Miss Mackenzie's property, the magnetic pull to follow this male Bigfoot was so overwhelming that I just couldn't help myself. The Bigfoot led me to a huge pile of what appeared to be composting leaves. Then he removed some of the leaves away. That was when I observed my mother's white SUV hidden beneath the fertile marsh. The first thought in my head is, what on earth is my mother's car doing on Miss Mackenzie's driveway, clandestinely hidden under all these decaying leaves, so that it just looks like a harmless pile of compost? At this point the Bigfoot was standing what must have been yards away from me. He was watching my every reaction. As I pushed back the curtain of leaves that were covering my mother's car, I stared at the windscreen, and I could see my mother's purse still sitting there on the front seat. In that quintessential moment, I knew something very nefarious was going on. The Bigfoot's eyes seared into mine, and he seemed to communicate with me, for I was locked under his spell. "She's in the house," he said to me, gesturing madly to Miss Mackenzie's house. "She's in there." The Bigfoot then turned around and glided away into the woods, and was gone from my sight, and in that moment the trance that had afflicted me was now broken, and I was free from its grip. I quickly checked to see if I could see Miss Mackenzie's car in the driveway, but she was not there. I was pretty sure her brother Elk was not around either, for Elk spent the vast amount of his time in his workshop carving his curios, which he sold in town. Either that or he was out in nature. I immediately ran to the front door, but discovered it was unfortunately locked. But I was sure Miss Mackenzie must keep a spare key somewhere, and I found one hanging on a rusty nail, obscured by an ugly hanging basket that was filled with dead foliage. I immediately put the key in the lock and opened the door. Miss Mackenzie's house was so dark, all the curtains were drawn, and the furniture in our house was friendlessly austere, and as cold as the woman herself. I hurriedly ambled down the passageway, and when I saw the security door outside one of the bedrooms, I knew instinctively I'd find my mother there. I found the key for the security door hanging on a hook outside the room, so I plunged the key into the lock and turned it. Seconds later, I was in the room. My mother was seated on the bed, reading a book. She looked up at me with a startled expression on her face. I guess she couldn't believe she was actually seeing me. "Howard! Is that you? How on earth did you find me?" Before I knew it, we were embracing, but then I quickly urged my mother to get the hell out of the house before Miss Mackenzie got back. I was glad to see she was in excellent shape. She didn't look as if she'd been abused in any way, but she had been locked up for many days. We quickly made our way back home, and when my father saw my mother, they rushed into each other's arms, as if they hadn't seen each other in years. A sea of tears were shed, and there was a rapturous joy in our home, as we were all very happily reunited.
"Ashley, what the hell?" said my father. "Is it really you? I can't believe it. I can't believe it."
"It's me," my mother said.
"Where have you been, love? We've been so worried about you."
"It's a long story," my mother said, "but I'm here now, and that's all that counts."
"I thought you'd left me for good,"
my father said.
"Never,"
my mother said.
"I'd never leave you, Simon.
"Are you crazy? You know how I feel about you and the children. You're all my life." Looking back at that tumultuous time we went through as a family together, it's hard to reflect over it all, as we were all so emotionally overwrought. But seeing my mother again made everything so much better. My mother's disappearance from our lives, even though it had been brief, made us fully appreciate each other all the more as a family. So out of the bad was birthed so much good. Suffice to say, Miss Mackenzie was charged for abducting my mother and was sentenced to over 5 years in prison. We soon learnt just how depraved the woman actually was, and the lengths she would ultimately go to get my father. She was convinced that in time my father would be beguiled by her charms and fall in love with her. What she intended to do with my mother long term, I do not know, but I prefer not to think about that. As you can imagine, gossip spread around our small town, rather like a swarm of locusts, about how my mother had been abducted by Miss Mackenzie, as the woman had designs over my father. People would say things like, "I knew there was something profoundly odd about that one." Elk never got into trouble with the police about his part in the abduction, as everybody knew that he'd been controlled by Miss Mackenzie to do her every bidding. I did notice he looked a lot happier these days, without his sister around. He continued to make an excellent living for himself, selling curios. My mother also hired him to do work in our yard for us. He told my mother all about his friendship with the hairy man. My mother is the only person Elk would ever confide in. I guess she became like a maternal figure in his life. I'm grateful to the Bigfoot I encountered, and the quintessential part he played in this story, as without his kind intervention, I would have never found the whereabouts of my mother. I do know this, that my father would never have fallen in love with the likes of Miss Mackenzie, whatever that woman may have falsely believed. The very thought of having Miss Mackenzie as a stepmother makes me simply cringe. I do believe the Bigfoot knew that Elk was controlled by the depravity of his weird sister, so he had to think outside the box as how to lead us to our mother. He chose me. I'm eternally grateful for that. So there you are. That's my story. Goodness gracious me, isn't that the most amazing story? I loved every bit of it, and I hope you did too.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.